check.
Damn, Christian, you're like all calm and collected.
Everybody else freaked
Oh,
out.
I'm
No, yeah.
waiting for you guys to.
Almost. There we go. Alright. We are live. Krishna, my man, thanks for coming in, brother. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course.
It's always good to talk to people who want to know more about agriculture.
I know, yeah. Should I pull the mic a little closer? Yeah. There you go. You can sit up closer if you want to. Just so. Alright, cool. And let's see. We are here doing our official Monsanto interview. Let me make sure we get everything all set up here.
difficulties.
I should have to stand up for him. I just reset all these yesterday.
We're live, right?
Yeah, we're live.
All right.
Let's face it on you, Nate.
That's cool.
It should be good. Alright. We're all good now. Sorry, technical difficulties. It's a small studio.
That's just how it goes when you got a brand new operation.
I know, man.
You know?
It's killing me.
Yeah. Still exciting, you know, working through all that stuff.
Yeah, I get this legit.
Another congratulations to you for we still adding equipment.
Yep.
The podcast it's kind of flying right now for such a new type of operation, and looks like we're gonna have some great shows coming up.
Yep.
And here throughout the rest of April. So whoever's tuning in, please go ahead and subscribe. That's the best way to support the show.
Please do.
And as far as today, we have a great show.
Yep.
Really excited because we have Krishna Bayaredi. We'll get into a little bit more about you personally. I don't know if you're comfortable or uncomfortable with that, but we're going to go there. We're going to talk... sorry, I'm throwing myself off here a little bit. Last night, yourself and me, with my wife and Sierra, we went to the Greens performance last night.
Yep.
And if you guys recall, we had Jordan Espinoza on of the Green a couple weeks ago, and we had a blast on the podcast, and we got to see him last night at the Waikiki Shell.
Yep.
What'd you think about
KCCN
that?
birthday bash, man. That was awesome. And then they had Jay Boog come out on like one of the last songs.
Yeah, it was a surprise.
Killer. I was so stoked on that.
It was really cool, you know, and everybody thought he was done, right? I think some of us kind of knew it was a Hana Ho type of thing. They kind of set it up a little bit,
We
but
have to do the Hana Ho.
they turned the lights off and everything, and everybody's like, what's going on, you know?
Hana Ho.
Yeah, and then he's like, hey, we got J Boog, you know, J Boog comes jumping out. It was really cool.
It was awesome, man.
We had a blast. The only thing that sucked was the $11 beers,
Yeah.
you know. But
$14
that's
margaritas.
Right.
We saw some people spill their stuff. We felt so bad because we were like, oh man, they spilled their beer.
Yep.
Sorry, fell.
That's just how it goes. So today we have Krishna Bayaredi,
Yep.
and Krishna works for Monsanto. And before we go any further, this is going to be kind of a unique interview because I'm actually a Monsanto employee also.
What?
Yeah, I know, right? I'm not this big bad guy, you know. So anyway, we're going to go into a lot of things regarding Monsanto and agricultural stuff. We'll get into with Krishna on exactly what he does and the impact to Hawaii and why we even do it here.
Yep.
It'll be really cool.
And another thing, we will be taking questions live. Some questions so if you have anything, if you're watching live, you can post them and we'll ask these two guys, see if they have the answer for it.
Yeah. So again, looking forward to it. I hope you have some time to stick around.
Yep.
And if not, it's going to be recorded to YouTube live forever, more or less, right? So you can always tune back in whenever you're ready.
Yep.
And listen to the whole interview. So Jordan and I, we have these sort of philosophical conversations every now and then. And
Yep.
Monsanto came up a few weeks ago, and it just kind of clicked. I was like, well, I'm a Monsanto employee. Maybe I can get a trying to pull off a Monsanto interview,
Yep.
and here we are actually happening. So what I want to make sure the audience understands is that Krishna and myself, we represent certain parts of the business.
Yep.
We don't represent Monsanto as a whole. It's a really large organization, so we have to be really careful about some things that we say, and that sounds kind of bad, but it's not. It's just that, you know, I perform a certain job
Yep.
with Monsanto, and to be fair to the company and to the viewers, that's what I can represent, and the same applies to Krishna.
And I think people can understand that too. Is like if you work for any company, there's going to be things at the top you won't have the answer to, you know, and that's understandable. I think people need to. I think they'll understand that a little bit more.
Right. Very cool. Krishna, what do you think about being here today?
Well, it's great. When I came to know you about your podcast, and I became curious, and I was asking Nate, okay, who are all doing, and what is the content? I said, well, so he's working with another great talented guy. They're together hosting a podcast, and they're interested in talking about in general agriculture.
Yep.
And I said, okay, let's sit down and talk about it. And that's my passion. And I grew up with agriculture and still in agriculture. And I'm extremely proud of what we do, how we do, and when we do. So it's happy to be
Right.
here.
And I think, you know, Christian and I have a great relationship, which is number one why he's here with us on today.
Yep.
I'm glad that I got him on because we have a really good rapport. I think we're really great friends.
Yep.
And so Krishna, maybe you can explain a little bit your role with the company. And one question I had is, I know you're a scientist by trade, but are you a scientist for Monsanto?
So that's right, Nate. As Nate said, my name is Krishna Bayareddy. I'm an agronomic lead for Hawaii seed productions. I grew up in India. I can go back a little bit and explain
Sure.
about myself. I grew up in India in agriculture family, and throughout my life so far, I've been involved with agriculture, and still my parents and my family, still we do agriculture. I got my master's in entomology in India. Then I briefly worked for Monsanto in India for a year. Then I got an opportunity to come to US to get my advanced education, and so I went to University of Georgia in Athens. I got my PhD in entomology.
Wow.
So I became an entomology scientist, and obviously when I was looking at where I could apply my knowledge and the place which can offer me an opportunity to apply my knowledge was the Monsanto was in my first in the list. So that's how I joined in St. Louis, and I was working there, and then I transitioned 3.5 years back to Hawaii. Here I'm extremely proud of the teams I'm working with. So I manage agronomic program as well as pest management.
Now, for people that don't know, entomology is the study of bugs, right?
That's right. I'm a bug guy. Yes.
You're a bug guy.
I'm a bug guy. A lot of people call me as a bug scientist.
Yeah. That's cool, though. I mean,
So-
there's a lot that goes into that, though.
There definitely is a lot. And speaking of that, we had a surprise for you that we completely forgot about. We caught a praying mantis at the door when we came in, and it's somewhere in the house. We'll get it to you.
That's a good bug.
Yeah, and I was telling Jordan all about your community efforts, because you're always in the schools, which I mean that's huge kudos to you for that, right?
Thank you.
Because it takes a lot of time, your personal time, and I'm sure your daughter can appreciate that a lot. And I see your bug case, and it's the coolest thing for me as an adult, you know. And when you look at it, I just know the kids, without even having been there, they probably go crazy for that stuff, right? It's probably the main attraction.
No, that's right. Like not only those bug cases, and we have a lot of live insects like monarch butterfly caterpillar and the praying mantis you said. So it resonates with a different age group, different backgrounds. Like you name anybody, they will connected with insects one or other.
That's awesome.
Right. Either they love them or they hate them, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. And I guess just like Monsanto and the seed industry, there's a lot of misconceptions about certain bugs, et cetera, right? And I think you've sort of brought that aspect to us at our working place, you know. especially when you talk about some beneficial insects in our crops that, you know, I always thought they were pests, more or less, right? And you brought about a lot of really good changes to the sites that we're going to get into later. But I think that's a lot of value that you've brought to the site. And you know, you mentioned that you worked for Monsanto in India. I didn't even know there was a Monsanto in India.
Yeah, neither did I.
Yeah, Monsanto is a global company.
Yeah.
I don't know how many countries, but we are in a lot of countries. And in India, Monsanto plays a big role in a different crops.
Yeah.
Right.
Especially cotton and corn, those are the big.
Nice. Yeah, I know some of the sites, maybe you can help me with this. Some of the sites that we sort of work with directly as far as sending seed or receiving seed, what are some of those countries?
Well, I do not know specifically on what countries, but I know in India. So India has a different regulations on exporting the seeds and importing seeds. I think they limit the export of the seeds. But in terms of technology, they are shared among different countries, and they looked at evaluated differently at different countries.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, I know some of the, we have fairly uh, good relationships as far as business relationships with Puerto Rico and is it Argentina, I think, as far as shipping and or sending or receiving seed. And you may be confused by we're talking about seed and some sort of industry specific terms. We'll get into all of that here. And actually,
Yeah.
before we move too far into all of that, let's just kind of get an introduction for Monsanto because a lot of people may not be familiar with Monsanto. A lot of people are because they're always in the
A lot of
news.
people are.
Yeah, they're always in the news, you know, and it's for guys like me, sometimes it's kind of scary even, you know, you go to a party and people are like, "Well, what do you do?" Right? And I say, "Well, I work on a farm." And that never satisfies anybody, right?
Right.
Oh, what farm do you work on? And then once you get to Kunia, their ears kind of perk up, you know, and it's
Yeah.
like, okay, I know where this is going, you know.
Yeah.
And the reaction is, it's like 50-50, you know.
Yeah.
It's honestly, it's a lot better these days, in my opinion, than it was a few years ago. With I know there was a lot of hubbub on Maui with some
Yeah.
legislation, the GMO ban,
Yeah.
etc. And there's a lot of sour feelings still about that, you know. But I think Monsanto's come a long way. I think a lot of that is due to you, actually. And I know you're a humble guy, but you can take some credit.
Well, so I got here, let's just say, a little over 3 years ago, but the teams have done a great job, and from like all the employees, right? I'm extremely proud of being a part of the team, but I would say my part is being like insects and the pest management related activities and educating, this, involving the kids in some of these activities, and it's very fascinating, right?
Yeah.
But I think everybody, and not only at Monsanto, in general, agriculture sector has stepped up in sharing the information and educating people on some of the things which they were not knowing before.
Sure.
Right, and well, you mentioned you educate children, but you educate us as well. That's a huge part of your role at Monsanto in Hawaii, and it. I guess maybe you can explain what exactly does agronomic mean, right? So you're the agronomic lead for what's the scope of that role?
So a lot of that's a really good question. Agronomic is a very commonly used term in agriculture we use, but not many people might know this, right?
Yeah.
So, like here at Monsanto, in all the sites in Hawaii, we grow corn and soybean crops. So when we talk about growing plants, it's similar to us. Like when we are when we are raising a kids.
Mm-hmm.
So they need certain things at a certain way, a certain quantity, at a certain time, right? It's the same way plants also needs in a different way. Like it needs a certain soil, it needs certain nutrient, it needs certain amount of water, and they are constantly under attacked by various pests from a competition from weeds, disease, bad insects, other things. So providing the best practices. Okay, these are the best practices we could do to take care of our plants in order to get a better yields. this, all these practices we call as an agronomics.
Yeah.
Right, and there's a lot of stuff that goes in that, as I've learned firsthand, you know. So let's go a little bit into more detail on you. You are a Monsanto Fellow, as I just recently learned, and I was surprised by it. Not surprised in a bad way. I was very happy when I found out, and I was kind of joking around with you a little bit, because is that the gold watch you got on right there? This guy is part of a very exclusive club. You know, there's
You were telling me about this recently. And I was
right.
Like,
So
what?
there's what 120 or 30 something people.
I don't remember the numbers, but we have a specific group of people who have honor to represent this fellows program within Monsanto.
Right,
That's
and
crazy.
yeah, and so the fellowship is not just a Monsanto specific thing, right? The same sort of thing you can find at universities. Is that correct?
There are different way of like appreciating people who have contributed it differently. Like outside of Monsanto, within academics, like there are different fellowships. One of the most popular and prestigious, right, the Nobel laureates, right, and it come to the university, like here, U.S. National Academy membership is really the big one when you become a National Academy member. So there is a lot of expectation and responsibility towards scientific community. In similar, within Monsanto, the fellows group have a certain expectation, and these fellows are selected based on the past contribution, as well as future expectation of helping teams on certain aspects of either science or the technology, how we can identify better solutions to help grow our customers.
Right.
And these, the recognition comes with a certain responsibility.
Right.
Is it like it's like an honor society? Then?
Correct,
Oh,
right,
okay,
yeah. It's,
Okay.
that is the highest honor within scientific community in Monsanto to get.
And that's the fellows.
That's a fellow's.
Man, that's crazy.
Yeah, and you got a lot of credentials behind you. That's why I think it's very important that we highlight all of this, because, you do represent Monsanto in a certain capacity, as well as I do, right? But with your role and going back to the scope of your role in Hawaii, it's huge, and it's just very appropriate that you've been selected and honored with being a Monsanto Fellow.
No, thank you. And then you pointed out, yes, I do represent Monsanto. Like I always say, like if you see video, I am a Monsanto, right? My daughter comes back and says, "Daddy, I am a Monsanto too." Then I ask her, "Why you want to, why you are Monsanto?" I said,
Yeah.
"Daddy, you are a Monsanto scientist, and all the things you do, I want to become a Monsanto employee too." Right?
Yeah.
So it gives me an honor. So going back to, do I represent a Monsanto? Of course, I'm in a Monsanto family. So, right. But first, I'm a scientist. I'm a resident of Hawaii. I live in the Mililani. In a neighborhood. I enjoy living here, and it resonates with my childhood, how I brought up in India, which is very similar to tropical climate. And
Yeah.
some of the food crops we see, it's very similar.
Well,
Right.
I think that's really important too to get that. What you touched on is like you're just a person in the community around us, and that's. I think a lot of people misunderstand when they talk about Monsanto. They paint it with a broad brush, right or wrong, right? But you guys are just employees.
That's
You guys
right.
are just people. You're our neighbors. You're our friends. You're family. When I found out you worked for Monsanto, I was like, "Whoa, what? You've been my dive partner for like 10 years,
Right.
You know, like you watch my back under the water, I watch your back." So it was like really interesting. Just like hearing it, I was like, "What? You work for Monsanto?" Like,
Right.
but I've known this fool for like 10 years. So it was just like everybody, even friends, when you hear that. So I understand how when you're at a party and you like start talking about what you do and people give you like, "What? What do you
Yeah.
do?" Oh, I know what you're
That's
doing.
been happening for 10 years.
That's so crazy. Man. That's so crazy.
Yeah. And just like, so you've been here for 3 years or so. I've been in Hawaii now for 14 years, going on 15 soon. And I haven't been with Monsanto the whole time. I've been with Monsanto for almost 10 years. And that's something I'm very proud of here coming in a few months, my 10-year anniversary.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. I'm very proud of that, you know. So you mentioned, and we talked about a little bit already, that you're a scientist, and I think it's great that you're on the show today as a scientist because scientists bring objectivity to an argument, to a discussion, right? And when we're talking about something as, I don't want to characterize it as volatile, but the conversations can be volatile when it comes to Monsanto and the seed industry, right? So I think that's very important that you can bring some objectivity to the conversation. What do you think about that?
Well, when we say scientist, right, there are different scientists. It's similar when you go to a hospital, there are different specialists. One who sees the heart, one you see the kids, one you see throat, and like the different specialization, right? So my specialization is in entomology and plant protection and agronomy. Right? I would be happy to get into any of the details, right? But when you say scientist, like definitely. So it's everything. My education my work was driven by facts and the data, and based on that, so we make decisions. So going back to your comment, that's
Right.
That's right. So
So
it's a factual basis.
right, data, and
Data.
that's a very important key word here, right? Tell us a little bit about your time at was it Georgia State or University of Georgia?
University of Georgia Bulldogs.
Yeah. See, I'm gonna get it wrong, and I'm gonna get something thrown at me here, but and they just barely lost the national championship, right? Was
Don't
it-
remind me. I'm just looking forward for next season.
Right.
That's right. I'm proud of Bulldogs, and people always say, right, once you're a Bulldog, you're always Bulldog, and I closely watch
Right.
football games.
And your Facebook profile picture, you got Bulldogs on there. I'm like, that's cool.
I'm a
You know.
bulldog too, but different kind. I'm from Waialua. I'm a Waialua bulldog, so that's our team. You know.
Right. So tell us a little bit about your training, and you did all of your American studies at the University of Georgia.
That's right. So when I applied to University of Georgia, I had to write a TOEFL. That's a foreign language certification
Right.
test. Then I have to write a GRE. Then I have to justify why I want to get into Georgia. So it's a long process, but I'm very happy I finally got admitted into Georgia, right? So I spent 6 years in studying and also doing a research on insects, and we can get into the details on some of the bacteria we commonly use to control mosquito, different insects. My research was to look into how that bacteria will make the mosquitoes and different insects toxic, right? And if they develop a tolerance or resistance, how do they develop? So I was working on that aspect of insect and microbial interaction, right?
That's crazy. That's like super cutting edge, though.
Well, if you think about it, right, that's what a lot of people when they're doing a PhD, especially in a scientific disciplines, they do, and they take up one subject or one aspect of the subject. They go into the detail, and then they come up with some cool information and the cool learnings.
That's insane.
So that's how the world advances.
Yeah.
Right. And you spent 6 years there.
So 6 years, I had an opportunity to study a lot of the advanced courses at University of Georgia, and I was very fortunate to teach a lot of undergrads as well as grad students on general biology as well as entomology in the ecology courses for the students.
Nice. Yeah, that's very cool.
Yeah.
You know, kind of along all those same lines, let's put it all together here. You know, we get into these discussions about Monsanto, the seed industry, and it gets very hot on social media. Okay, and we work for Monsanto, And one of the first things that always gets thrown out when we jump into the conversation is, you can't be a part of this conversation. You work for Monsanto. And I think that's just, the most opposite kind of thinking that you can have, generally speaking, right? Because we're the guys that can attest to some of these things.
Yeah.
Yeah, what are your opinions on that?
Well, I think it's interesting too, is because while they shut you down when you're on social media, right? They also try to look at the company for answers.
Right.
So it's like it's ass backwards.
Right.
It's so crazy, man.
Right. No, so on social media, I'm active. Like I do post a lot of pictures on what we do because I'm proud of what we do.
Right.
Especially as you mentioned, right, coming from such a scientific background and studying about a lot that information in a books.
Yeah.
When my leadership and my organization supports me to implement some of the things I learned in the book to implement in Hawaii, which makes me extremely proud.
Yeah.
So, like, a lot of people talk about theoretical stuff, right? When we are implementing practically and when we are seeing the benefits, and being a like agronomist or a entomologist and seeing those benefits, it makes me proud. Right? So going back to, yes, some people not aware of what we do, some people understand and really supports agriculture, or in general any facts based, right? Like, so you can always provide information when people come back and ask about particular data, particular information and the scientific studies and all this information. But it will be hard to provide information when people come back based on feelings, based on their perception. Oh, I feel this way, I feel that way. It's difficult because what I feel is different than what you feel.
Yeah.
Right.
But there are some common ground. Like, so both of you work for two different organizations.
Yeah.
But you see, you have a common interest, and that's how you guys are a team.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's how in the society, that's how I think, right? Yes, people have a different perception, right? But if you look at what's happening in the world, what's like some of the challenges which agriculture is facing, which even in our education system, which how the community or other organizations are involved in giving back to the society or a community, which is extremely important. Right?
Yeah.
We are playing the active role in building the next generation.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, and I think it's interesting too that you bring that up, because if you kind of zoom out that scope a little bit and you look on a global scale, right? We have problems with other countries because we don't communicate with them. We're scared or unknown, whatever it is. But there's these miscommunications and we don't talk, we don't trade with each other, we don't have these normal building blocks of nations that would allow us to be friends. You know what I mean? So it's really interesting. So if you like zoom it back down on a personal level, you see these little tiny battles sometimes going back and forth just because people have a misunderstanding or they bring in their emotions and their feelings into a conversation. So for me, this podcast has helped a lot. I'm libertarian by nature anyways, so I try to kind of follow the nonviolent principle for the most part, even though I used to fight, I used to do this other stuff,
Right.
It's a little different, but that's discipline, that's martial arts, it's competition. It's a little different than me being angry at you or him or for whatever reason without us talking about it. So I think these types of conversations are very important to have.
Yep, definitely. I think social media has kind of brought a different dynamic to the conversation, though, right? Because there's huge societal implications with social media, right? I mean, we are a new society because of social media, and with that, the conversation or the style of conversation has changed, where everybody is big and bad on social media, right? And we lose that. We lose that thing when you talk to someone face to face, right? You can be respectful. Generally speaking, you're much more respectful, and you consider other people's opinions and such. But when you're on social media, everything gets blown out of proportion, right? And I think that's what we've seen, especially in regards to our industry.
I'm glad you mentioned the social media. I can give my own example, right? As a scientist, we always had to look for a peer-reviewed scientific information, even to cite, to present anywhere, right? So it was easy for us, like if somebody come and talks to me in the entomology, especially in my research focus, I would have known major studies because they go through intense scrutiny before it comes into the public. Right?
Right.
So I get to chance to see that information. Right? So now with social media, there is no regulation, no filter, like who can write it.
Yeah.
And I can give you a small example. When I was teaching a courses in Georgia, so they have to cite the scientific studies for some of their class assignment. And one student was very smart. So he wrote his own words in a Wikipedia and he cited it.
Oh
So,
my God.
so I have to teach him, look, those are not valid for when you're writing a scientific article, scientific
Yeah.
paper. So it has to go through certain reviews, certain expertise. They look into provide their feedback.
Sure.
So right now the social media totally bypasses all the established principles and protocols and all those things, right?
Yeah.
That
Right.
makes it a very difficult. If somebody comes and asks me a question based on social media, I may not be aware of it because it didn't fall into my
Purview, yeah.
preview, and I never get a chance to review or look at that material.
Yeah, and that's really interesting. And I'm not sure that social media or the internet should have regulation necessarily. That's a different conversation. But I understand where you're coming from, where if you don't have at least basic principles of understanding of one another with whoever you're talking to, you can just post anything, and there's nobody checking, fact checking. There's nobody. You have to do your own research on that. And not a lot of people do, and that's the problem, I think.
I'm laughing because in 2018,
Yeah.
memes would be considered credible. You know, the pictures with the, half of a sentence written on it, and
A little
people
tagline.
share memes, and it's just like everybody starts commenting on the meme, like, yeah, you told them, I'm like, come on, it's a picture, it's a meme, and
It's the most genius thing, though. Like, I mean, people.
whoever invented memes, man, they got it, you know what I mean?
Killing me.
But the most basic college experience, I think, is a literary course where you're taught to establish credibility first, right, or find credible sources.
Yeah.
And that's completely been derailed, well, at least on social media anyway. And I know it's a struggle for a lot of professors, since I'm kind of in that experience right now, where they do battle, where, Wikipedia, with the courses that I take, all my professors, like, it is not a resource. Don't use it, So, and I think that's important for obvious reasons.
Wikipedia is a really good tool if you want to look at a really general information and to know things, but to use it for scientific studies, I think. As a scientist, right, I always go back to the scientific journals and scientific literature.
Yeah.
Right. And I think, to be fair to Wikipedia, because I like Wikipedia,
No, it's a great tool.
I think probably 90+% of the stuff on Wikipedia is probably accurate. They do cite a lot of actual, studies
Scientific
and
journals,
information
yeah.
and stuff like that. But you do get those one-offs, right, where it just completely skews it, all the other information,
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I
Well,
agree.
let's go back a little bit. So we've talked about the agronomic piece. We talked about you a little bit, and I want to make sure people understand what Monsanto is and what we do. Also, what we do in Hawaii and why Hawaii is important. Could you tell us just a little bit about Monsanto and what we do?
And one quick question too. I had a question about it. Is Monsanto Hawaii? I know obviously Monsanto Hawaii is it's not separate from the major Monsanto company, but are there any major differences between the two? Is it just an offshoot, a different location, and we just call it Monsanto Hawaii? Like, what's the big differences there?
That's a good point. I think it's because we are in a different location.
Yeah.
That's why you call it as a Monsanto Hawaii.
Yeah.
It's easy to say, okay, hey, Monsanto is located in Hawaii, it's called Monsanto Hawaii.
Yeah.
But the good thing about is we tend to focus on our local community, our and local agronomics, and anything which is related to our local. But in terms of agronomics, yes, we specifically focus on and local pests and local some of the soil types and some
Sure.
of the growing environment, and definitely. But as a company, it's Monsanto.
Yeah. Okay. And I think part of that too is like how you're involved in the community. It's part of Hawaiian culture. You know, we are very involved in our community. We're very open about.
I appreciate it. Yeah, for me, sustainability and is a really passionate subject for me.
Yeah. No, that's good.
Yeah, and we'll get into a lot more of that stuff that what we're doing. One thing I'm very proud of, without going into too much detail, is the sort of the soil rehabilitation efforts that we're doing right now, because we're sort of taking over land from the sugarcane and pineapple days.
Oh, that was rough.
Very rough, and this
Yeah.
guy can tell you all about it. And
Man.
we do a lot of things because we ultimately want to have a good crop, right?
Yeah.
Good yield for what we're doing.
Yeah.
And a big piece in that is the status of the soil, the state of the soil, and we're doing a lot of things right now to get the soil back into a really good state of affairs, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
And it's a really long process. It's something we've been working on for a long time, and I think we're seeing some results that we'll get into
Awesome.
much more detail later on. So Monsanto, just generally speaking, we got about 20,000 or so employees. Is that correct?
Worldwide, yes,
Worldwide.
that's right.
Worldwide, 20,000.
20,000 plus employees.
It's not as bad, not as big as I thought.
Well, so
Just saying.
Yeah, one of my friend also made that comment, right? Oh, wow, it's a small employee base. How come Monsanto is so well known?
Yeah.
Well, I said, like, we are 100% agriculture focused company, and the work we do is finding a technology and solutions to grow better food.
Yeah.
That's one of the fundamental requirement of a human being is a food.
Yeah.
So we touch so many people, and that's why it's so important. People are very fascinated about knowing what we do.
Yeah, and so earlier in the podcast we mentioned we were talking about seeds. We're throwing this word out really loosely and not really explaining it, So maybe I'm sure you can explain it a lot better than I can. I mean, I know what we do, right? But what exactly does that mean? Because we're a seed company, very easily put, right? But it's a lot more complicated than that.
And you guys are more of a big data company now, kind of, isn't that? Like that's what I've kind of picked up on. You guys are
Right.
collecting a bunch of data now. You guys aren't as big ag as you guys used to be. It's more about big data.
And I
in a
think,
way.
well, I think the big data piece supports the seed part of the business, right?
Sure, yeah.
It's something I'm still a little bit confused on because the company kind of made this big launch on, we're now a big data company. And I don't think they did a good job of really explaining what that meant.
Yeah.
It's just this big, huge announcement. You may disagree, but,
Well, right. I mean, well, when we say, right, when Monsanto said we are a big data company, but if you look at every aspects in either technology, biomedical sciences, aviation, you name anything.
Yeah.
So the big data is much more advanced, right?
Yeah.
Right. So the data is right now, like as you were talking about before, data, right? Generating a data because of our computational ability, because of our mechanization, and which is generating a lot of data. Like imagine how many phones people had maybe 10 years back,
Oh yeah.
right.
and see how many phones we have, and the amount of data which is generating. It's really taking those numbers and providing some meaning to it, right?
Yeah.
Some are structured data, some are unstructured data. When we talk about Monsanto, we are solely, as I said, focused on agriculture, right? If you talk about agriculture, what are some of the factors like soils, environment, rain, temperature, and the crop growth pattern, and some of those challenges comes in the crop was nutrition, the pests, and so all this data, we need those which is very similar to what we do at Monsanto
Yeah.
Hawaii here. How can we make those data, that data to make decisions
Yeah.
to help growers? That's
Right.
simplifying saying like a big data. How we were not looking at all those factors,
Yeah.
but now we have an ability to measure. Like with iPhone, people can take a certain data, like generate some data.
Right.
It can be on a health, it can be on a people, it can be on anywhere.
Yeah.
Right? So
Yeah. And I think ultimately that big data piece is it ties directly into protecting the environment, right? Because we're gathering data, and with the one example we'll get into later is the reduction of the nitrogen usage in our fertilizer mixes. It, we don't need to apply that extra amount, right? So because of the data that you've collected, you can evaluate, exactly what we're applying, and ultimately it protects or helps the environment in a certain sense.
all right, so I want to clarify, it's not I collected, right? We collected. So I am a part of the team, and I am extremely proud of the team, how much we work hard to generate this data to help make a better decisions, right? So we are talking about only one nitrogen piece, right? But when we take a soil sample, we look at multiple things, okay? We look at how pH is, which is extremely important. And then we look at different nutrients, what plants needs is, and we measure how these things and what plants need. And as going back to your point is, yes, we can make a certain decisions based on the data we are generating, which will help correlating what plants takes and what is the good for soil, what is the good for environment, and what is finally economical for the growers.
Great. Now, sorry, we keep kind of skipping over this because the conversation just flows so easily, right? But let's get back to the seed part, right? I think people may still be confused on what that means. So you explained that ultimately Monsanto and its competitors are all about basically growing more food for more people, right? More efficiently, using less water, etc. But what exactly does that mean, right? Kind of tie in that seed piece to that.
Yeah.
Right, when we talk about seed, it can be a different form, right? So, for example, like sugar cane and a lot of those, when we talk about seed, that's a stem. Part of the stem, they plant to propagate sugar cane,
Yeah.
right? In a lot of times, even certain fruit, they just graft, and that is a seed for them, right? It's a seed is anything materially used to multiply it. Right? Technically, so when it comes to and like in a world, I was just looking through, I believe 40 to 60% of the seed is sold by the companies in the public and private sector, and only 2/3 was sold by these commercial breeders, and 1/3 is sold by government and public university or public institutes, right? So, like at Monsanto, we grow certain types of seeds, and we give it to the farmers. And with that seed, we also provide different technologies.
Yeah.
Right? I don't know whether I answered your question, right? So we do grow a lot of vegetable seeds. We grow corn, soybean, canola, alfalfa, cotton. I might miss, but it really depends on different countries.
Well, yeah.
Right.
I mean, there's a lot of needs for different countries. Like over in the Asian countries, a lot of soy products out there, and they wouldn't be able to survive. A lot of them out there if they didn't have a lot of those products, right? And growing. Well, I guess you could talk a little bit more about that. The different countries that grow different things that are.
Well, let me jump in
Yeah,
here a
right.
little bit. So you effectively answered the question,
Yeah. Thank you.
just to kind of break it down a little bit more. I mean, so we don't sell generally to the public, right? We don't grow food
Yep.
and sell it to the public. We grow a crop, right? And we generate seeds. So similar to what your local farmer would do, right? They grow a product and they sell it to the local grocery store. We do that, but in a different way, right? Or not in a different way, but it's just a different scope or different scale, right? So we grow products, both GMO and conventional products, and we take care of the product, we grow it, we harvest it, we basically well, for corn anyway, we shell it and dry it. There's a lot that goes into it, right? But that seed goes into different processes where they eventually get sold to farmers as hybrids, right?
Okay, thank you for clarifying it. So we are talking about Monsanto Hawaii, is that right?
Yeah.
So in Monsanto Hawaii, we grow parent seeds, right? That seeds will not be going into any consumers, will not be grown, right? So what we do is we take these seeds and we make a hybrids, and those hybrid seeds will go to growers. All the seeds we grow here, does it go to the growers? Maybe not.
Yeah.
Only small percent which qualifies certain character, certain expectations will go only in an advanced phase.
Sure.
But what we grow will not directly go to the growers.
Okay.
Cool. Yeah. So something that's really interesting, I think, and probably not many people would know this, and this is just one of those general pieces about Monsanto in Hawaii, is that we just won the best place to work. And for the category of large companies, 2 years in a row.
2 years in a row.
And we
right.
tried and we tried and we tried for years, and then finally we get 2 in a row, and I got goosebumps because it's really cool, you know.
Yeah.
So
Well, you're part of something that's interesting, and the fact that you guys got that as a Monsanto company, right?
That's right.
That's huge.
yeah, it
That's
definitely
huge.
is.
That says something about at least Monsanto Hawaii. You know, it's really, that's crazy.
Right. I mean, it's not like it's a third party who gave this award, and it's a. I mean, I think like me, every employee we work here, we feel proud and we feel extremely happy to work here.
For sure.
I'm not surprised we got that award.
Yep. Yep. And so, and again, that's the best place to work in Hawaii. And since we're talking about Hawaii, why Hawaii? Why Monsanto in Hawaii? Why is that important for the business?
So that's really a good point. A lot of people do not have a complete information on it. Dr. Brubaker, he's called as a father of corn in Hawaii.
Yeah.
So he just retired from University of Hawaii. So he's the one who worked with the seed companies to bring the seed companies to Hawaii. The roots goes back to 1960. So since 1960, the different seed companies are in Hawaii growing corn because of the climate, which allows to grow 2 to 3 crop cycles per year, plus the skilled workforce which comes from a pineapple and sugarcane industry, which perfectly matches, right? It's a complementary to each other. So we get everything, and because of that, it not only Monsanto, so we have other seed companies in Hawaii and growing different parental seeds and sharing with the different places across the world as well as mainland to grow hybrids to give it to growers.
Right.
That's awesome.
Well, let's go ahead. We're going to move into some of the sort of the meaty topics I know a lot of people are waiting for. We're in this about 50 minutes.
On here. We already got some questions.
Yeah,
on
so we're in this about 50 minutes already, and that's just the introductions and what we do.
Yeah.
So there's a lot there. It's a huge company, and you know, we're doing a lot of things in the community, etc. And so I'm glad we got to kind of get some of that information out there. And so now
That was the one I wanted to throw out there. The other one is Monsanto involved in any Mars projects or future interplanetary missions with NASA or SpaceX in regards to colonization and or sustainability with other planets?
that's interesting.
That's very interesting and above my level. So, but one thing I would say, definitely Monsanto is very focused on sustainability of our planet.
But that's a good question.
No,
though. That's
right.
crazy,
You
right?
know, I'm happy to see people are thinking beyond our planet, right? So we our commitment towards sustainability, carbon neutral, and preventing the food waste in the dialogue, and water conservation, and a lot of different sustainable activities, and definitely Monsanto is very forefront in these activities.
Yeah, and regarding the first question, the whole avocado piece, I mean, I don't think we don't do anything with avocados, not in Hawaii anyway. But just
Not anywhere in that my knowledge.
right. So, but generally speaking, I guess the industry, or I guess GMOs in general, and I'm not an expert on GMOs in this regard, but there is a papaya. I'm assuming it's a university developed it. I'm sure you can expand on it, but there's a papaya that was, I think it's the rainbow papaya,
Correct.
that was effectively nearly decimated in the state, and because of the GMO technology, has been brought back, and it's prospering. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
I'm sure. I think most of people in Hawaii know. So more than 75% of papaya grown in Hawaii are GMO papayas. Right? And again, I am speaking as an Hawaii resident. I eat those papayas, right? And I have a couple of papaya trees in my backyard. I grow, and some are not rainbow papayas, but I see the ring spot virus. So this virus was the one which was transmitted by, again, one of the bug insect.
Yep.
So it was devastating the papaya industry,
Yep.
papaya plants, right? And I always tell people, well, even the 25% which say non-GMO, for me still it's considered as GMO, because I see papaya in my backyard. Every papaya is kind of infected with the ring spot virus.
Yeah.
When we have a virus, that's another organism we are eating.
Yeah, true. Oh, yeah, true.
So, but you're right. I think, and when I talk to a couple of papaya growers, they're extremely proud of this the technology, and they saved their families, and they saved their papaya industries.
Now, what actually started the ring bacteria on the papaya? Well,
Virus.
was it a virus?
It's a virus transmitted by an insect.
What insect was that?
I believe it's an aphid.
Oh, the aphids.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah. So they transmit the disease to these papaya plants.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So the aphid is a sucking, piercing insect,
So-
right?
Yeah.
That's a technical word, piercing and sucking. It's like a mosquito, okay? So they insert their mouth parts into the plant,
Right.
take the plant sap, but in that process, they secrete saliva which contains these viruses. The same way mosquito does the same way too.
Sure.
Yeah, and some of those, well, the reason I mentioned sucking, piercing is sort of a category, right, that we focus on. And we get affected by those categories of insects at our farms as well, right? Let me say this as we're moving into this sort of next section of the podcast. So we're going to have kind of we're already doing sort of a roundtable kind of discussion here. We're going to get into some things that can be really heated. We're not going to get heated here, right? But
No.
these are the topics that people are really passionate about.
Yeah.
And so Krishna and myself, again, we're Monsanto employees, but we only represent the company in a certain capacity, right?
Well, only what you know of. You know,
Right.
like you can only respond to what you guys know, what you guys deal with. I'm not looking for you guys to answer questions about, you know, things that you guys don't know about. But I'll ask some of the hard questions that we've gotten and see if you guys have answers for them.
Yep.
But you guys will be talking about it as an opinion, your personal opinion as employees of Monsanto, not as any official capacity for this next segment.
Yep, bring it on, you know.
Okay.
So
So I'm sure you guys have questions too.
I have a lot of questions.
Yeah.
You know, so let's kind of real briefly go back to that big data piece. We kind of started talking about it already. I just wanted to throw this out, is that even though Monsanto just sort of came out with this new platform a year or two ago, I think we were already sort of in the big data business where we're already collecting data and using it on our farms to grow crops, etc. Would you agree or disagree with that?
Well, yeah, right. As you mentioned, right, we were generating data for a long time, right? As the computational capacity is increasing, there is a large data being generated, right? So that's why now they're talking about the big data. It's really the terminology, but the data, it's always been there to a certain extent. Now we are generating more because we have more tools and technologies available. I would say we were already. I mean, you take not only agriculture, right? Like any other industry, they have some data. Based on data only, we can make certain decisions, right?
Yeah.
Right.
When you go to a shop, you need to know how much budget you have,
Yeah.
right? How much you want to spend there, and like those are all numbers, right?
Yeah.
So
Right.
when you have multiple people talking about those numbers, that's a big data.
Yeah, so data spans all parts of the business, right? Not just the scientific and agronomic section of the
Correct,
business.
right? Not only with Monsanto, like any sector in our day to day life, the data is so important.
Right. Even marketing, for example, I mean, they use a ton of data, right?
Yeah.
Right, I mean, you open an iPhone and it shows you, okay, this many steps you walked, this many miles you ran.
Right.
So this is all data, right?
Right. But it sounds scary, though. You know, kind of
Yeah.
trying to get to this like an objective part of the argument is like, excuse me, Monsanto already kind of had this, scary whatever to it. You know, people are scared of Monsanto for various reasons, and then Monsanto comes out and says, "Oh, we're big data now," you know, and again, maybe it's just a personal thing. I wasn't real clear on what the big data thing meant, you know, but
Well, it's interesting because we did a big data podcast last week, right? And we actually talk about, because I'm from the IT sector, right? And so big data to us is completely different than what it may mean to Monsanto. Big data for us is what is like the metadata that's being tracked, and they can put together kind of a narrative to see what you're doing or who you're talking with, and that's big data in our field, and how companies handle your privacy and all your information and what they do with it. So that's the big data collection stuff that we were talking about last week. And it may be different from, it's obviously different with Monsanto. You guys aren't that kind of big data company, but you guys take a bunch of data from whatever you guys get with your entomology or scientific data, and you guys have to use that to make business decisions.
Right.
It
I mean,
makes sense, yeah.
to be fair, I don't want to talk about the entire company, right?
Yeah.
So I could specifically focus on what we do and what that falls into my job responsibility at Monsanto Hawaii, right? So we generated tons of data. So we have a weather stations on every farm. Like we have 5 weather stations on every farm. So we take a soil sample on every piece of land we grow, and we provide irrigation, we provide nutrition to our plants. It generates a lot of data, right?
Sure, yeah.
If I look back at the data, like in a simple way, like it compiles, right?
Yeah.
So I need some tools how we can use that data to dissect out and make it a more simplified way
Sure.
to see the data to make a decisions.
Yeah.
Whether it's a wrong way or like either it's to go forward or not to go forward, we have to see the things.
Yeah.
If we have the data for over a period of seasons, then it makes it even bigger data.
Yeah.
That goes back to what Jordan mentioned, like see, you used the term metadata.
Yeah.
So it's a very common terminology, right?
Right.
If you
Yeah.
translate that, it's called big data, right? If you compare to my job and what we together do here, so we generated a lot of data. Right? So, I mean, if you can expand that to other parts of the businesses, and definitely there is a different way of looking and way of answering questions.
Sure.
But definitely, we don't have all
Yeah.
Right.
knowledge on
Yeah.
really what aspects the company is looking at.
yeah, I think for me, I'm just curious, generally speaking, what people think about it. And honestly, big data is not really one of those hot topic issues. You know, it's kind of a new thing. But I'm just curious what people think of it. You know, if they hear Monsanto, or not just Monsanto, the entire industry is kind of moving toward big data, right? And I'm really curious to know what people think. I know you can't really answer that, you know. So maybe as we have more conversations moving on into the future.
Sure. Well, I think
Okay.
once we get maybe the business side of the questions in a future podcast,
Right.
I think that might be interesting to hear from a business perspective rather than what you guys are doing. So, yeah, I mean, we can come back to that. Circle back
Right.
around.
And Monica, if you're watching, we'd love to have you on one of these days. So
Please, Monica.
yeah, and Monica is the communications.
PR
Corporate
kind of-
engagement lead.
Great. So see again with the titles, you
What was
know.
that
But
title again?
so sorry, I'm calling you out, Monica, but I'm sure you don't mind.
Yeah.
A few years ago, there was some battles, and this is not a company specific thing. This kind of goes to legislation within the state. On Maui, there was a huge anti-GMO movement, and there still is a fairly large movement, right? But the legislation that was passed locally was to ban GMOs on Maui. Excuse me. So it seems like in the last few years, that's kind of died down a lot, and I'm kind of curious as to why. And I know we've been out in the public. Excuse me. uh, can you add anything to that? You know, your thoughts and opinions on why things are different now?
I'm not sure about all the legislation and what went on and all, but as a scientist, as a Hawaii resident living here for over 3 years and being participated in so many community events, one thing I could add is I had an opportunity to interact with so many people on our open houses, on different events, where the ag community goes and participate and sharing what we do.
Right.
And in terms of schools, teachers, and extremely I'm extremely proud. People are really coming to know what we do, right?
Yeah.
And I see several thousands kids comes by our sites, wanted to know about agriculture, wanted to know about how the food gets from farm to table, right? And one thing I could see, and again being in for 3.5 years, people are really becoming more knowledgeable on what we do in general, what the GMOs are, and what the benefits they have, and how we can how they are helping in terms of sustainability, in terms of food security,
Right.
and those areas.
And I think that, and it's not just you out there in the community, it's a lot of people within the company that's out there and teaching people about what we do. I think a lot of it is just simply letting people know what we do.
Yeah.
Because we, excuse me, I'm really sorry, but we didn't always have that strategy, you know, as an industry in the state. It really was just sort of this, the method in the past was, I guess people will just get over it, you know, or people will just kind of come to understand what we do on their own. And some new people came in the company and the industry, the farm organizations that the seed industry works with. I guess they all kind of had a powwow and said, "Hey, we need to start teaching people exactly what we do, you know, in an objective way."
Right. I mean, it's an interesting you made that comment. So, like again, it's in my 3.5 years being in Hawaii is right. So even for me, like I go to work, I really day to day focused on my job, and I am extremely happy I get to talk to some of the small farmers on a agronomics or a plant protection wise. So if you see, all the time I'm focusing on, okay, we are an agriculture sector, and these are the growers, and we all face same challenges when it comes to pest management. To be specific on my role, right? I believe that was our strategy, right? Many people realize that Monsanto is one of the biggest vegetable seed suppliers to Hawaii,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But our customers are always happy with our products. As you see in the society, the number of people who are growing food is decreasing, and the number of people who are being an advocates are also decreasing. And again, everybody was focusing on their jobs, and like farmers were focusing on working hard to grow food and to sell that food, and when we are in that situation, we didn't realize people, a big sector, like a big chunk of people were not aware of about what we do and about these technologies.
No, you say, one thing you said was your customers are always happy with your guys' products. Now, define your customers. That's just the farmers.
That's
That's just the farmers, right?
Our customers are growers,
Yes.
like farmers.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Again, to be specific, in Hawaii,
Yeah.
what we grow here is corn and soybean seeds. these are all parent seeds, doesn't grow to the growers, but definitely down the line they grow to the growers.
Sure.
But vegetable seeds, which we grow in a different parts of mainland and other parts,
Yeah.
they get to sell in Hawaii.
Okay.
But maybe you can kind of jump into basically what you were getting at, though, right? So, I mean, sure, the farmers are happy with what we do and provide to them, but I guess the general public, and this is a broad brush, a certain section of
Yeah.
the general public is
Yeah.
very unhappy with the perception of what we do or the
Yeah.
service or product that we provide. You know,
Well, I think there's some are there's some concerns. There's a lot of concerns out there for what these products are, right? Some valid, some not, right? There's a lot of scare tactics out there that people kind of try to get an emotional reaction out of people and try to hop on board like, oh, all GMOs are bad. Well, let's take a step back. You know, it's a fear of the unknown. I know a lot. For me, it was too. And I'm not completely 100% sold on GMOs, right? But I understand their purpose in our life, and I understand the benefit in some areas. So even for me, this is a great conversation to have because there's people on the ground working. You're a scientist, you know, you do the thing out here in Kunia. It's amazing to me, and I have the opportunity to ask questions to you guys. So I really appreciate that, first of all. And I guess we can hop into some of these questions then, I guess.
And yeah, maybe I'll mention other thing too. So we have a lot of resources, right?
Yeah.
Like discovermonsanto.com, we can find a lot of answers, and the gmoanswers.com.
Yeah.
There are definitely a lot of the resources people can always look up into, right? Even I say, right, I went to school, I got my PhD, but I have only limited knowledge, right? A lot of times if I need more information, I go to Google, like I go to
Sure.
web and look for that information.
And I'm sure, like, getting it from the horse's mouth, I think a lot of people might say, "Oh, that resource is biased," right? So, I mean, there's always those, and that's kind of what we're trying to cut through here. Is like,
of the website, right? This is not a knock on the website, but
yeah,
if I were to use that gmoanswers.com or .org, whatever it is, on my paper in school, you know, my professor might look at it as, hey, that's a biased source, right? Even though it's a legitimate resource.
yeah,
Well, I would say a legitimate resource for knowing the knowledge, right? I'm not sure when your professor said not a legitimate source, like when you talk about scientific data or any of this information, definitely there is like a PubMed. That's where I usually refer to. There is a lot of different scientific journal information, which schools really look up every day, and I look up every time too. Is you can find that information, right? GMO answers is just kind of a general information on knowing and the different these topics about like what is GMO. You can find simple answers which everybody can understand, right? If you go to any of the scientific papers, only certain people can digest and interpret that information.
You were right about that.
That makes sense.
Oh,
yeah.
God.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, those scientific papers, they just get so crazy, you know. And anyway, you know, I think something you were kind of getting into, Jordan, a little bit, is GMO, like, so why do we need it? You know, one of the big arguments is that, you know, not that long ago, there was no GMO in the sense that we know of it, the context that we know of it today, right? So why do we need this technology?
Well, that's a good question. Okay, I'll go back. So when you say like we didn't have a GMO long ago, maybe I'll take it a differently. We always had a GMO, right? Whether it's a more technologically advanced or it's a naturally happening, that is the question. Like what we are seeing is the GMO was created with more technological advancement or genetic engineering, right? But when we talk about GMO, so it is created by traditional breeding, created by mutagenesis, or created by irradiation, genetic recombination, we call it as genetic engineering, right? So the trend is CRISPR or gene editing, right? So we have a different the techniques or methods which were using to develop these plants. And when you go back to recently, I'm sure all this technology came recently to make it more advanced, more sophisticated.
Right. Why do you think there is the disconnect, though? You know, because again, GMOs, people just think it's. I always say the same thing. It's like crossing a strawberry and a pig's leg or something dumb. You know, I. This is. I kind of made that part up, but there was an example that a student used just a week or two ago when he found out I was a Monsanto employee. He literally said something to that extent. And that's not an uncommon thing that I hear. There's still that misconception, you know. I, sorry, really,
Yeah, go
really
ahead.
briefly, because I know explaining what a GMO is can be a really lengthy conversation. But I mean, is that really how it's done? Are you just crossing random things?
That's not true. It's a very very sophisticated scientific method, right? Again, it's according to my understanding, because when I was a grad student, we used to clone bunch of different genes into bacteria to make an insect protein,
Yeah.
right? To to study about insects, to understand about insect physiology and some of those insects about it, right? So it's not that simple, right? So we cannot cross mosquito to another moth. So it's not. So again, my understanding is we always use nature knowledge. There's nothing new we are doing. Right? So one of the most used technology is one of the bacteria which commonly find in a plants. So you might have seen trees and other things which causes big nodules. So that bacteria naturally incorporates its DNA into the plant genome. So if you find a gene or a one character which helps to tolerate certain herbicide, or say certain it is tolerant to an insect, so scientists in general, I'm not talking about Monsanto, right?
Yeah.
In general, that's what we do
Right.
in even research labs at the universities and public institutes too. Is you identify what that gene is and understand that, then and under a small scale and put it in a plant, and first, if it is I can talk about an entomologist on insects, right? So we, not only Monsanto, a lot of seed industries have the technology which protects from a certain insect damage on a corn, soybean, and cotton, some crops.
Right.
So how it does is so we have identified that technology from a naturally occurring bacteria which is found in the soil,
Right.
which has been, I don't know how many generations, right? It is natural evolved that response was. So we identified which was causing toxic to certain bad insects. So then the next one was take that gene, not literally take that gene, right? To take that information and put it in that the naturally occurring bacteria and incubate with a plant cell. For us, like in a corn, so you incubate with a certain corn cells. Like
Yeah.
when we talk about the cells, like our body is made out of a small, tiny trillions of cells, right? So that cell and that takes up that information gene and makes it into their own gene,
Right.
and it will be multiplying that technology in one seed.
Sure.
So once we get that seed and we grow and cross naturally with other corn seed to get it into the technology into the corn plant.
Now, but there obviously is some GMOs. For instance, like crossing fish with tomatoes, for instance, right? So that's not naturally occurring. It's naturally occurring in the fish, but when you're transferring something from a different species of I guess.
I,
Yeah, go ahead.
You're IT engineer. I can get it.
Yes.
Okay, so I mean, let's get back to in general, right?
Sure.
When you become a sick
Yeah.
from when you have a flu,
Yeah.
you have a flu in your body,
Yeah.
right? And I'm pretty sure people understand this, right? Flu is a virus.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't have its own cell or anything.
Yeah.
It has to use host, like in case of us or a plant or animal, anything,
Yep.
their cell to multiply, to survive, to nutrition, right? That means literally it is putting its genetic information into our body. Right?
Yeah.
So naturally, we have a lot of viruses in our body.
Yeah.
Right? So that's, it goes back to naturally is happening, right? But what you mentioned about crossing fish and
Tomatoes.
tomato, it's not literally happens, right?
Yeah.
But there are certain association might happens like legumes, right?
Yeah.
If you talk about legume plants,
Yeah.
if you take out the roots, the bacteria which is colonizing in the roots, which is really helps to take up the atmospheric nitrogen,
Mm-hmm.
and which converts into a nitrogen bank for the plant.
Yeah.
So plant use that nitrogen as a nutrition to grow. Like that kind of naturally, are we crossing that bacteria and plant? No, right?
Right.
But some of that information in that bacteria might be found in the plant because they've been embedded for so many years, and it's naturally occurring under processes.
Okay. Interesting.
And the same thing, like you can go back to studies, right? Like recently I was looking at a plant. So when you graft two different within the plant, right? Plants, and it get exposed to different. Sometimes they get a disease.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
You can easily identify the disease in those plants. Right?
Yeah.
So is it a GMOs? Right? It's already GMO. Like in the same with the humans, right? When we have a kids, the genes which comes from a mom and daddy, right?
Yeah.
And you look back those genes, they get from their grandparents and their grandparents.
But those are the same species. When you cross, if there's I think what people are worried about is when you actually cross breeds or cross species of genes. Everything has genes. We all have genes as us. But if like you have the parents that make a child, yes, that is in a sense a form of GMO, I guess. But they're the same species. So that's like saying a tomato and this tomato, putting it together to make some kind of hybrid that these two have two different characteristics. It's different than like tomatoes don't grow in the winter, so I'm going to apply this gene from a different species to allow it to grow in winter. Something like that. You understand what I'm saying? Yeah.
Right. I mean, so that's where the science and the technology comes in, right? All
Sure.
those things.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah.
So it goes through extensive studies. Like there's tons of thousands scientists that work on every day,
Right.
and looking at their safety, their like boundaries. We can talk about ethical boundaries and scientific boundaries to like a safety boundaries. There's
Sure.
a lot of guardrails set from a scientific industries, sorry, not scientific advisory bodies, and regulatory agencies. Like it's an expectation whether, excuse me, you work for a company or work in academia, so we have to work in those guidelines.
Right.
Right. So going back to your question is, we always make sure that technology is really helping, right? And again, I always want to talk about the common terms, right?
Yeah.
So we touch here, right?
Yeah.
Like if you take our hands and put it on a growth media where these germs grow,
Right.
we have tons of different bacteria.
Yeah.
But all of them can survive on us? No. Only few they can survive on us as to like they can make
the
us
skin, yeah.
right.
Yeah.
The skin, like it's the same concept. When you put in a plant, it has to be a sustainable.
Yeah.
It has to naturally like the plant has to accept it, right?
Sure.
Right.
Sure.
So when we do that, we do it like as a scientist, we do it in a very sophisticated way, and looking at all those guardrails and not crossing those guardrails.
What exactly is compatible though from say one species to another, right? So everything has DNA, everything has genes, etc., right? So when we say, you're crossing a tomato with whatever it was,
Fish,
a
yeah.
fish, I mean, I know you kind of touched on this, right? You're not literally transferring one to the other, right? But what is the compatibility piece, right? Can you explain maybe, are genes compatible throughout all of nature or DNA?
That's well, there are certain genes. That's what all the scientists they look at, right? When they take um, the the decision to combine, say, like a bacterial gene into the plant,
Yeah.
they really look at what is the naturally occurring. So what happens into the plant, what happens into the in the surrounding environment, and what is impact on the non-target things. Like every aspects they look into, right? So compatibility is a very generic term, right?
Yeah.
It really depends on how you look at, right? But definitely, it has to be within those guardrails set by the regulatory bodies as well as scientific advisory bodies. Uh, um,
And I know got a comment about American Indians doing something kind of similar with corn. They crossbreeded different types of corn together to make it stronger. And so in that case, and that was Native Americans back in the day, they were doing that. So that's an interesting perspective, but that's kind of like a GMO in a sense. Is the purpose of it was to make the corn stronger to grow in different environments or whatever the main purpose of them doing that was. But it was interesting that they figured that out in a way. So
Yeah, and I'd like to add on to that because that's a piece that we've kind of missed out on this show so far is that a big piece of what we do is actually breeding, right? And GMO is a part of that. You can obviously explain it much better than I can, right? But for maize, for example, going back to this question, corn is maize. I think it's probably what the Indians would have called it or something. I don't know. But if you look at the original form of corn,
doesn't look like it now.
so corn is a grass,
Yeah.
and I think it's what is it called? The original corn, teosinte.
That's right.
Yeah, and it's a grass. It looks just like a grass,
Yep.
and we've actually had some on the farm. It's really interesting, and I think 13 seeds or something like that is what it produced. Looked nothing like the modern form of corn.
Where you have butter corn and all that shit on the cob. No,
Right.
it's not.
Yeah.
Well, not many people know about it,
Yeah.
right? So from a mustard, we selectively bred so many different vegetables.
Yeah.
Like flower became a cauliflower, the leaves we bred to become a cabbage. It's very cool if you get into a little bit of a science.
Yeah.
But as a scientist, like it always wonders me, from a bacteria, from a microbe to the huge plants and animals, we are all made out of 4 bases. We call it as the nucleotides. Right? Those bases form a gene and DNA and whatnot. So
Yeah.
it's an amazing what nature they do. And going back to my bugs, right?
Yeah.
Not many people know we and the bugs share the same bigger group called animal kingdom.
Right. Sure.
There are so many things we have in common between
Yeah.
us and the bugs.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. No, that's a good point.
Yeah, so now that we we kind of know what a GMO is, I'm a Monsanto employee and I cannot explain it beyond what you just explained, right?
Yeah.
But one thing I want to add though, like why do we need a GMOs, right?
Right, that's
So
exactly.
that's the one
Yeah.
thing we missed it, right? So I grew up in India.
Yeah.
Even I was looking at, I always ask this question to even the school kids when I get to interact with them. So during 1960, world population was, I should not be getting the number, like 3 billion.
Yeah.
3 billion.
Yeah.
And now
Almost 8.
6.9 billion.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So like look at amount of arable land,
Yeah.
amount of like a number of people who want to grow food is shrinking, but number of people who are depending on to feed on this food is getting increased, right? So that's why like growing up in India, that's the biggest thing is how do we feed all these people,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So like we needed a technology, right?
Yeah.
What some of these advanced technology have done to create high yielding crops and protecting these yields and essentially helping the world move towards the food security is an amazing, right? So that's why we need to be looking at a new technology. We need to be looking at thinking differently to feed the growing population. Of course, we have to do this sustainably, and we want to grow this with a minimum impact on the environment. So these are the things we have to do using the new technologies, which can help. And going back to the big data, all those data points we need to make a better decisions.
And I can see like GMOs helping in other countries where they lack food, right? I think here in America we kind of gorge up on too much food. So do you think there's that? It was just another question we had is like, should we be promoting GMOs in this country when we have a really big obesity crisis type of situation? Why are we promoting it in this country rather than just pushing it to other countries where, because we don't need any more food than we already have. We overindulge in food, and now we have an obesity crisis. So I guess I'll throw that question out there. It was one of the questions we got. So.
Yeah, one piece to that, I'll let you answer that, but America produces, as far as corn anyway, we are the largest producer of corn.
Yeah.
And I think the vast majority of it gets distributed out. So we're already kind of doing that, but to finish up the question, I think Christian can take that.
Yeah.
Right, and also if you see what we do with that corn,
Yeah.
we make a fuel, right?
Yeah.
It's a livestock food, right? It's not really, as you mentioned, obesity and those things. Like I look at as to grow meat, right?
Sure.
Right. To get like ethanol from a corn, and like we are talking about only the food, but the economics of exporting, as Nate was pointing out, we are one of the largest producers, right? So when we export it to the different countries, not only the seed and the technology we are inventing, it's really impactful on a bigger scale.
Yeah, and I get that. I think some of the concerns are because now there's corn in everything, corn starch, corn syrup, corn this, corn that. There's corn in everything. It seems like with the focus on corn, even with the ethanol, right? It's corn-based, right? There's a lot of health concerns that people have with even feeding farm animals. They're just filling them up with corn. That's something that they wouldn't normally eat when they're like grass-fed or this, that, and the other. So I guess that goes back to the ethical portion and what farmers do. And now, these farmers don't have to do any of this stuff. These are farmers choosing to grow corn, grow these GMO products. Like, do they get to choose what they really?
It's up to them what they grow. Like usually, I mean, at least working with Monsanto for 5 years now, right? It's like I see that it's a grower who defines the market, like what they really want to grow, how they want to grow.
Right.
It's really, I mean, I come from a farming family, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
My dad will make a decision on does he need to grow tomato or does he need to grow eggplant or sugarcane.
Sure.
All those things are made by my dad,
Yeah.
right? It's really depending on what market they have.
Right.
That's
interesting. Okay.
I'd like to hit on this one point. You mentioned that Monsanto has kind of, and I don't think it's just Monsanto, it's the industry in general, it kind of has taken on this mantra that they're responsible to feed the world, right? I mean, that's the business plan, right? And I think there's some concern that, I know there's a lot of people squirming in their chairs, right, when they hear that. And they may be saying, well, that's kind of an artificial argument, right? Just to push GMOs, right? And kick out all the natural, conventional stuff. Is that an artificial argument? I mean, can we really sustain the world on conventional farming methods?
Well, as you were pointing out, right, so Monsanto, we solely focus on agriculture, right?
Sure.
We like all kind of farming as long as they are sustainably they can produce however they want to. It's conventionally, organically. It's up to the growers how they want to grow, how to sell their products really. But I mean, from my perspective, I'm an entomologist. I have my own opinions.
Sure, yeah.
How reliable and growing certain foods in certain way, right? But I mean, at least I talking to a lot of my leadership team and listening to some of the talks. I mean, we support all kinds of agriculture. I mean, even like as I say, like even at Monsanto, like that's one of the proudest thing I get to share is all the fields we are constantly under threat by different pests, right?
Right.
But the way we are focusing on, not all fields get equal attention. So
Right.
we have successfully growing one couple of fields where we have to use our limited tools, and some fields we have to use all the tools we have in our toolboxes to manage some of these things.
Right.
It's like we have all kind of scenarios, but it's up to the grower if they can grow economically and sustainably, and we very support
Sure.
of what they do.
No, I guess going back to a little bit of the checks and balances that you guys do for the GMOs, one thing that I found that was kind of interesting was the Monsanto Protection Act, right? This whole thing is it was essentially pushed in when Obama was in office back in 2013. It was the Continuing Appropriations Act that they slipped in to the Continuing Appropriations Bill. And people called it the Monsanto Protection Act, right? So it was like
We knew it was coming.
You can't sue Monsanto. You can't do this. But what I found out that was really interesting, it only lasted for about 7-8 months. It was only to the end of that fiscal year, and it hasn't been reapplied since then. And it was only for things that were USDA safety approved products to allow you to continue, so there was no stop loss with you guys producing, like farmers and growers producing certain GMOs. If an activist came up and said, "Oh no, that's not healthy" or whatever, then they would have a court proceeding. They'd have to stop growing that crop at the time. So that kind of prevented that growing of GMO products. But this bill was good because, first of all, it only lasted 6 months. People don't know that it was already approved USDA, safety approved GMO products in the biotech product. But I didn't even know that. So you hear a bunch of this stuff on social media. We go back to that again. And there's a bunch of like crazy accusations thrown towards Monsanto, like, oh, the government is protecting Monsanto. And no, it wasn't. It was just in general the biotech industry, and it was preventing stuff that had already been approved. This was not stuff that you can, like, if you had something that was currently being worked on that had not been approved yet, this would not go in that legislation. I thought that was really interesting because people pass it off as if you guys were doing your own thing without approval, and it was a safety issue is what they were bringing up, but it's already been USDA approved. That kind of puts a nail in the coffin for me.
As a regular scientist, I don't pay too much attention to those bills and those acts.
Right, yeah. Well, you look at data, right? Like that's all you focus on.
Right, and one thing I surprised when I joined the company, people talk a lot about Monsanto.
Yeah.
But the GMO technology is not limited to Monsanto. Like,
right.
So many industries, so many public sectors, so they make this technology, right?
Yeah.
And as a scientist, I always believe they always do it in the best interest of growers and the society.
Yeah, and so that bill was sort of a mischaracterization, kind of unfair to Monsanto actually, because it wasn't specifically a Monsanto thing, you know. And I guess if you did kind of if you got in Monsanto's footsteps or a similar company, the fact that anybody can sort of shut your operations down based on commonly unverified or false knowledge that's out there, you effectively shut down the business. So I think it was more of a business type of thing. It definitely wasn't protecting Monsanto, even though the title was very unfair.
It was, but the title was given by some of the activists, right? That just came about. And so I just found that it was really interesting. It passed in March of 2013, and it stopped in December of 2013, that same year. That's all it was for. It was for a few months, and that was it. Like, it's not like a permanent thing. This was for that fiscal year, and a lot of people don't understand that.
Yep, and kind of on the FDA piece, I mean, FDA obviously regulates, they are the regulating agency,
USDA too, yeah.
USDA. And again, there's people squirming in their chairs because they don't trust the FDA or the USDA,
Yeah.
right? And and honestly, it's a lot of the same people squirming
Yeah.
on the other issues, right?
Sure.
And I think that's fair if you have concerns, right? But you know, the FDA or USDA, they regulate a lot of different things, you know,
Yeah.
consumer products, you know, not just food, etc.,
Right.
and drugs and medicines and all that kind of stuff. So do you, as if you sort of support that argument, do you not trust the FDA, USDA to, you know, not apply fair rules to everything else, or is it just because they approve GMO seeds, right?
Yeah, and I think it goes back to them having that personal emotional attachment to GMOs. So like even the website you were saying, GMO Answers, I think people would be kind of skeptical of that site just because it has GMO in the title. They already have their preconceived notions coming to the table saying, oh, well, you know, that site, GMO Answers, I'm not going to believe them because, you know, blah, blah, blah.
Right. The one thing I just want to
Sure.
you guys mentioned, right? So a regulatory body at federal level, you have a USDA, FDA, and EPA.
Right.
They look at it in a different angle, right? Then we also have regulatory bodies at the state levels, like for Hawaii, so Department of Agriculture plays a huge role in looking into some of these local enforcement and the local purview.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of attention placed on these products. I mean, what generally, what's the process? I mean, does a company like Monsanto or Syngenta, whatever, do they just like, you know, come up with this plant in the lab and then just throw it at the USDA, FDA, EPA, and they just like sign off on it?
So that's always surprised me. That's why I took 6 years to get my PhD.
Yeah.
So some of the science we do, it doesn't become that product that easily, right? And just simply looking at, I mean, as an, I look at, I was listening to some of the talks on what is the timeline of this, some of these biotech products.
Yeah.
Like at Monsanto, we spend around average 12 to 13 years from the conception like to the making a final product.
Right.
And as I say, like as a grad student, we used to do so many experiments, right? If company has so much resources and so much of scientific experts in that, if making that product is that simple, then we will have thousands of products, right?
Yeah.
But no, it's a very strict, it's a very long process, and especially, I'm sorry, so since you're an IT person, you know, like in technology, how quickly the technical, the devices are becoming available.
Yeah.
Plants are not, like it has to go through so many processes, so many cycles before it comes to your public as a product.
Yeah, we have to do this thing called the Moore's law, right? So it's how technology advances at a certain level every 2 years. You know, that every 2 years it kind of doubles, or you know, there's a certain level that you can predict where our technology is going to be at a certain level years down the line. So we've actually had to kind of scale back our technological advance because of this curve. We were advancing so fast we couldn't keep up with it. So it was kind of interesting how that kind of played into it. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, interesting. Let's kind of jump into maybe labeling a little bit. I guess I'll just throw it out there. I guess what's and this is not representing the company, but what do you think about the whole labeling argument? You know, I know there's a federal bill that has been passed for GMO labeling.
Yeah.
Generally speaking, what do you think about that, and is it going to have any impact on the industry?
Well, I don't really look into too much into these bills, right? But when I read in some news, right, when I go with my family to the grocery store, whether I go in Hawaii or whether I go in Missouri, I should find the consistent information, right?
Right.
So as a scientist, that's what I look for, right? as long as any enforcement which becomes very consistent,
Yeah.
anything naming and disclosing any information is always good, but it has to be consistent.
Yeah.
Consistent and fair.
Instead
So
of going
Right,
from
right.
state to state varying differently, yeah, no,
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Yeah.
If there was a federal regulation across the board that said, okay, well, everybody's going to use labeling, this is how you got to do it, then that makes sense, yeah.
Yeah, and again, I mean, that's how I look at as a scientist, right? As a
Right.
as a company or as business leaders, they might have a different opinion, right? But in general, when I look at the products I see in the market and how they label, how they provide information, it will be extremely helpful if they could have the similar information.
right. And I think a lot of us can kind of understand that states, similar to humans, sort of have opinions as well, right? And that's kind of where the concern lies, is that where one state may sort of fairly represent GMOs versus organic, other states may not, right? They may see to pit one versus the other, and most likely it would be GMO is the bad guy, organic is the good guy. Go for this, and pay 2 times more for this organic product, which is not if that's your thing, that's all good, right? But that the pricing difference is another conversation where that gives the perception that this is the better product, right? So, and that goes into sort of the whole opinions of states and organizations.
No, we can kind of go into that. Like, another question we had was going back to like what's better or worse kind of thing. For GMO products, is the nutritional value any different from the original?
That's a really good question. A lot of people ask, right?
Yeah.
So if I take a rainbow papaya
Yeah.
and a regular papaya, I don't see any difference. So, but what I do see is the GMO papaya is better protected from the insect or from the disease, right?
Yeah.
But in terms of nutrition, in terms of composition, I don't see any much difference.
You don't see it because you don't have that data, or you don't see it just by looking at it, or like, looking at the data. You're saying if you
Right,
look
by
at the
looking
data,
by looking at the data, even
Yeah.
by looking, as I was saying, like, okay,
Right.
so every day we eat, whether it is a breakfast or a lunch or anything,
Yeah.
all of them have a DNA, protein, RNA,
Sure.
all the
Yeah.
genetic components,
Yeah.
right? So you take a corn, for example,
Yeah.
which are genetically engineered to protect from an insect.
Right.
And there is tons of already bacteria in the plant, right? So what you're taking from one, the regular plant, the conventional plant versus GMO plant is one protein extra,
Yeah.
like than the conventional one.
Right.
But the protein is get degraded in our body, and
Yeah.
our body, like every animal, has so many bacteria inside the gut.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and we eat tons of foreign protein, like meat
Sure.
we eat,
Yeah.
the fruits, like everything we have has a proteins and DNA.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
So I personally, I don't see any nutritionally different.
Okay. Well, I think that's a good point to make. I guess.
Yeah, because the argument, I guess, is that organic is better, nutritionally speaking, right? But there are products, GMO products, correct me if I'm wrong, that have been basically engineered to have certain vitamins or minerals or to produce more. I don't know how to characterize that. For example, golden rice. Maybe you can explain to us what golden rice is and if it is or isn't an important product.
Well, I don't know much about entire thing about the golden rice, but what I know about is it provides a vitamin A,
Yeah.
right? So in that specific cases, yes, because that specifically we focused, not we, like the groups that developed the technology focused on providing a vitamin A rich rice in countries where people were needed a high vitamin A, right? So the similar concept, I mean, again, like conventionally breeding also, we have a selective breeding to produce a high shelf life of a certain products. Right? There are certain traits specifically targeted. Right? Only that character or difference between a GMO and non-GMO.
Sure.
Other than that, there's not much difference in terms of rest of the information, rest of the quality of those products.
Yeah, I would say that personally, as a supporter of GMOs, I wouldn't characterize organic as inferior to GMOs. You know, I don't think it's fair for someone on the other side of the argument to characterize GMOs as inferior to organic, right? But it's really, it may be kind of going back to that social media thing where it's just kind of a new society. It's almost like, what team are you on? You know what I mean? And I am actually, I wouldn't say I'm a huge supporter of organic. I support it generally, right? I mean, because Monsanto provides conventional seeds still, right? So as a farmer, you can still buy conventional products, right? Non-GMO products. And the farmer has the discretion to buy it or plant it, whatever they want, right?
Yeah.
Right. I mean, as I mentioned, right, as an entomologist who always focusing on plant protection, right? So many bugs we have, so many challenges we have, right? It's up to the grower, so really how they choose to grow, right? And in my backyard, I have a tomato and some pepper plants and some papaya.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd say like I go here once in a while and then look at the bugs and manually take out, right? If
Yeah.
you have a hundreds of acres of the same plants, can I do that? Right? So that's really, can you afford to grow anything organically or conventionally? Right? For me, again, I like all kind of agriculture, right? It's up to the people how they produce. And again, I was saying an example, like day to day, my job at Monsanto Hawaii, we have some fields which needs very less attention, we have some fields which needs high attention.
Oh, goodness.
Well, for me, I have a lot of heirloom seeds in my backyard here. I grow a bunch of different crops, jalapenos, cantaloupe. I'm just starting. I had some crops die because of the ring virus. It was there, but I try to keep it organic as much as I can, because for me, if I take a normal mainstream tomato from the store that is most likely GMO. I don't know for sure, but most likely there's a lot of 90% of the products out there are probably GMO made up of.
That's not true.
Is that not true? No.
Not true.
Well, what is the percentage that you would think?
Not percentage I know. So I know only 9 crops have been approved for commercial production.
What's that?
Not 9 crops.
9 crops. Okay.
Right?
Oh yeah.
Alfalfa, corn, soybean, cotton.
Yeah.
Sugar beet, some squash, and papaya.
And that's it.
That's it, right?
No tomatoes, no.
Like potato has been recently that I think potato is one among them too.
Yeah.
And the apple, they've been recently talking about gene editing and all those things, but I'm not sure whether it's been released to the market.
Well,
but other than that, I don't think any biotech crops, at least for my knowledge, which are commercially available, which are available in the grocery store.
Right,
Really?
and that's a big distinguishment there, right? Is commercial versus studying or university levels.
Right. What do you get in the grocery store?
Now, is that Monsanto only doing those products, or is that across the board? Those are the crops that all
across all over the world.
No shit. No shit.
I'm glad you got that out there.
No, it's good because, like, again, I'm learning. Like, I'm not an expert in this type of field, and this podcast is for talking to interesting people. Like, this is fun for me. This is fun. I like this because I replace the information I get if it outweighs, the information that I get. If that facts outweigh, I gotta replace it. You have to be a healthy skeptic, but once you're proven, that's interesting.
I would add one more thing. I think recently Bangladesh approved a GMO brinjal eggplant.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. But across the board, only those crops. That's crazy.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Right,
So
we are the biggest vegetable seed producers.
sure, yeah.
Right.
So you guys still have conventional seeds that you sell.
Tons. We have a conventional corn.
Yeah.
We have conventional all kind of crops, right?
Well, I guess that makes sense because with your entomology, especially too. Sometimes you don't even need to use pesticides, and you use your bugs.
We
To
use
combat, yeah.
multiple tools, right?
Depending on the situation. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's worth noting that our vegetable division, just called Simonis, it's still Monsanto, but it's Simonis is and I can't represent them. I don't know much about it other than it's a huge part of the business. And correct me if I'm wrong. I think there's only a sweet corn GMO variety that Simonis is distributing. And I spoke to Monica, her title again,
Corporate engagement lead.
corporate engagement lead, actually informed me in the meeting that we had that Monsanto and Simonis is actually working on a organic certification, believe it or not. So
Yeah.
Monsanto, part of the business will be certified organic. So anyway, maybe we can sort of move into a different segment because we can continue with those arguments. Maybe we can move into some of the agronomic stuff, some of the specific things that we do at this site or in Hawaii, generally speaking. So we've already mentioned that we grow corn, right?
Yep.
Krishna, what other crops do we grow in Hawaii, and maybe what are the locations?
We grow corn and soybean in Hawaii as a Monsanto Hawaii. So we have operations in the 3 islands: Maui, Molokai, and Oahu. And in the Molokai and Oahu, we grow majority corn and a little bit soybean.
Yeah.
But in the Maui, it's corn.
Great. And so obviously,
Sorry, Nate. So for a business purpose, right?
Sure.
But we grow tons of different crops to bring in our good bugs, to take care of our soils, and we can get into the more details.
yeah, definitely. That's one of the exciting pieces I'd like to dive into, the cover crops and sort of that soil rehabilitation piece that we were talking about earlier.
Sure. Quick question before you start on that. Do you guys do anything with transgenic crops? Transgenic?
So the GMOs are called transgenic, right?
Yeah.
So both are synonymous.
So it's synonymous.
Yeah.
So okay, because I was kind of confused on that term. I wasn't sure if transgenic was GMO, but it is. It just
People call it as a different, right? Genetically engineered crops, biotech
Yeah.
crops, and GMOs.
yeah.
Um,
Okay, I wanted to clear that up because I was confused on that part. Okay, it's not something different. It's the same.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's the same thing.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. Continue.
Yeah, no, so it's some of these crops, right? Corn and soybean. That's all we deal with in Hawaii, right?
Yeah.
And we're on 2 islands,
Three.
right? 3 islands, Maui, Oahu, and
Molokai.
Molokai. I know this. Jesus Christ. So
Can't get out the knee hill.
no. I mean, with these crops, there's a lot that goes into growing them, and we can go for hours talking about this. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about from A to Z in as simple as a manner as you can. What it takes. Maybe what are the steps it goes. Let's go with corn. I know soybean is basically very similar, but let's just kind of go with corn. And what does it take to grow a corn crop in Hawaii?
Oh, this got to be interesting.
It takes a lot of things because Hawaii, it's a paradise.
Yeah.
Obviously for humans,
Yeah.
of course for everything else too, for my bugs too. Right?
Yeah.
So, but the good thing is we have a extremely talented teams and focusing on different aspects, right?
Right.
And again, from agronomically, what it takes to grow corn is the really simple way to compare to us humans. If you want to be healthy, if you want to be a strong and healthy growing, what it takes is we starts with our house, right? We try to keep our place clean. We try to take optimum food
Right.
and good quality water, optimum water, I'd say. Then we try to maintain a healthy lifestyle by maintaining good fitness. And then whenever you become sick, we do go to a doctor to see, to understand what the health issue we have. do we need a medicine, or do we need a vitamins, or what kind of need we need? So at the end of the day, we combine all those things to take care of ourselves, right? It's not one thing which really works as a magic bullet.
Right.
It's a similar thing to grow corn also. So we need to have a good healthy soil, and then we need to provide the good amount of water and the nutrition which plants need. Then we need to protect them from bad weather, bad pests, and then we need to harvest them at the right time and to get a good quality products.
Yeah.
And I mean, in general, it's right. We can
Very
put it
generally
this way.
speaking, yeah. So it's not as simple as just opening a seed packet, putting it in the ground, giving it a little bit of sunlight and water, waiting for it to grow, and then harvesting it and sending it where it needs to go. We do all of those steps, but every one of those steps can be broken down into hundreds of
Sub-steps. Yeah.
very specific monitoring and I guess the word monitoring in our industry could sound ominous again, but we literally monitor the crops, and anybody does, or any farmer monitors their crops, right?
You have to. Otherwise, you don't know what's going on with it.
Right. On my end of things specifically, I mean that's sort of what I do at the farm that I work on. That's part of one of the things that I do is we monitor the crop for nutritional needs. We monitor for pests, which includes weeds, fungus, viral disease, bacterial disease, etc. So again, there's a whole lot that goes into that. What are some of the ways that we protect the crop?
So that's a good question. Again, we use multiple tools, right? So it's not one thing we use to protect a crop. Again, I was explaining. For me, that's one of the things which really fascinates me to look into the soils, right? We always starts with a clean and a healthy soil, right? So once we start with a good start, it's a foundation, right? Then once we plant, and then we take care of it. Okay, how much water those plant needs, how much fertigation we need, and we measure these things, like right. So that's why, and it makes me feel proud. So we irrigate all our crops through drip irrigation.
Yeah.
What that means is, like, it's a pipe which buried underneath the soil, which gives certain amount of water at certain time.
Sure.
Right? And all this is measured and monitored, and the collected the data. And some of these recent IT innovations and technologies we are using, it's really helping us to see visually things and how much water we are giving, when we are giving, what is the weather. Right? So once we get into the good plant health, then we take a tissue sample and look at what is the nutrition profile on that plant.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So you do that at every multiple stages throughout its life of
Right.
growing
I mean,
process.
the corn has only a 3 months life cycle.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
So we look at a certain stage.
Yeah.
When it has a 6-leaf or 7-leaf stage, and look at the nutrient profile, and we think that, okay, is it an acceptable condition, or is it a certain nutrient it lacking?
Sure.
So whether we give through a drip, or we go and foliar spray as a band-aid.
Sure. Yeah.
So to basically develop a healthy plant.
Right.
Once they have, then we'll, as Nate was mentioning, we will monitor the field for is it a weeds competing for these resources, sunlight, water, and nutrients, or is it a bad insect is coming to eat on it, or is it a disease? When we have a healthy plant, which is supported by healthy soil, they can tolerate a low level of any of these pressures, right? When the pressure goes to certain level, that's where we see what is the best tool we want to use to minimize their impact on the crop.
I might have you look at my backyard.
Sure. Yeah. But the good thing is, to a large extent, so we have a cover crops, that is a ground cover, which produces different flowers. I'd say, like, we have a different mix, which produces flowers which attract different good bugs, from wasps to pollinators to all the parasitoids, and to a certain extent we take their help in managing the bad things.
Right.
In fact, I work with a entomology professor at the University of Hawaii.
Yeah.
He grows tiny wasps. They go after certain moth eggs,
Yeah.
and they lay eggs inside those bad moth eggs.
That's crazy.
Yeah, and it's already naturally available, but
Yeah.
we make more numbers.
Sure.
And they're tiny. They don't affect us, or they don't sting us.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yep, and because of that, right, that's a natural form of protection or biological protection that allows us to effectively, at some point in time, minimize the amount of pesticides we use. So we've done a lot of things to reduce pesticide usage.
Yeah.
And I don't know the numbers specifically. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that, about the significant trend over the last 2 or 3 years of more focus on IPM as a whole, where the pesticide part is just one little piece of it.
Well, and another thing too is like even going back 20, 30 years, chemicals were used a lot. They would just inundate the crops, and it was almost too much, right? I mean, would you agree?
Well, so that's an interesting, right? So before I answer this question,
Sure.
I just want to add on what Ned said, right? So because we have a robust these methods and all these techniques we are incorporating, they
Yeah.
are helping us to decrease the pest pressures on the fields,
Yeah.
which is definitely helping to minimize some of the pesticide, which is one of the tool in our toolbox.
Right.
So going back to the question, right? It's very interesting. Nate mentioned plant hopper is one of the big pests for our corn.
Yeah.
All corn growers in Hawaii. Right? So it's an interesting. I was looking at how long we had this insect in Hawaii. Right? I cannot trace back the history, but I found one study from 1904.
Wow.
As another bug guy.
Wow.
His name, let me see. I think its name was David Fulave. Right?
I'm not sure. I saw the study also.
So, so he is listed the pesticide used in Hawaii, which really surprised me.
Yeah.
How we were using arsenic-based chemicals, right? And other one was cyanide-based gases. Like all these are our homemade recipes he described in the studies, and petroleum-based. These ones they were applying on the crops, and now
Long time ago too.
right.
You know, like
It was 1904, and
Yeah.
we were using like a ferrous sulfate,
yeah.
and there is some arsenate of I cannot remember those chemicals to control weeds.
Yeah.
And it was back in 1910 or 1904
Yeah.
during that time. It's similar trend all over the world. The chemicals are not new.
Yeah.
Growers are always using different tools to manage the pests.
And I think one thing too, for people that don't know, organic farming still uses some fertilizers, some types of pesticide, but they use carbon-based, a lot of carbon-based, like copper sulfate and stuff like that, for the organic farming. So
I don't want to speak for them because I don't know much
Sure.
about. But what I
Fair enough.
just read what is they do use certain approved chemistries.
Sure.
Right, certain agriculture inputs which
Organic
are approved
compounds
by
and stuff, yeah.
right. But I didn't really look into the details.
Yeah.
And one of the my entomology colleague, I met them at one of the scientific conference. He was sharing some of those products. The conventional agriculture farmers are also use the same products,
yeah,
but it has to be approved by certain agencies
sure.
in an organic agriculture case.
Something I think that's very cool, and you already kind of mentioned it, is that we use a drip irrigation. Some people may not be familiar with that, but it's basically an individual line for. We deal with row crops, right? So everything is grown in a row. We don't just spread seeds out, right? And with every single row, we put down its own drip line, where we can fairly accurately measure how much water is going on the crop, right? And I think that's a very important thing to kind of focus on here, because, we're effectively saving a lot of water, right? Because we know how much water we're putting on the crops.
That's a really good point. Yeah.
Right. So that is the one thing, and other thing also we use a recycled water. right?
Oh.
So both in the Maui and as well as here, so we take the water. I mean, here especially, we can talk about how it comes out of military base,
Right.
and they purify, they recycle, and they bring it to the R1
Yeah.
grade, and we use that water to irrigate our crop. In fact, about the sustainability, that's right. That extremely makes me happy to be part of this team. So is
Yeah.
a lot of our farms are certified by Wildlife Habitat Council.
Right.
So we give a lot of importance
really?
to
Okay.
native plants, pollinators. We have a pollinator habitat on every farm,
Wow.
and monarch butterfly, the different pollinators,
Yeah.
and
No,
and
that's-
Wahoo, we have two beehives,
Yeah.
which we use for educational purposes as well as it's a cool insect for me
Yeah, for
to
sure.
be with.
Now, oh man, shoot. I guess we're gonna have to get into this too. This is just a bigger topic. I don't even know if you guys would know this information. This almost seems like a business side of it. And speaking of pollination, right? What happens if your bees from your beehive in Monsanto, or let's say an outside farmer, right? You have GMO crops, and they come and pollinate from their hive across, and then go back to their beehive, which is owned by a non-Monsanto farmer. What? I don't even know how to ask this properly. Oh man. Do you have any legal basis for going and taking that honey back from that farmer who now has I guess essentially your guys' pollination or your guys' honey? I don't know how to really ask that question without.
I don't know how to answer that question, but I can say here in Hawaii,
Yeah.
corn we grow
Yeah.
is pollinated by wind,
Right.
which doesn't need any pollinators,
Sure.
and also some we hand pollinate depending on the specific
And that's specific to Hawaii.
specific to Hawaii, right?
Oh, okay.
And so because that's how the parent seeds we selectively breed certain traits into this corn.
Right.
But going back to your question, I'm not the right person to answer the legal.
Oh, that's fine.
those
No,
things.
no, no, that's
but
fine.
corn
for
is
sure.
definitely pollinated by wind.
Okay.
Yeah,
Here,
yeah.
it's specific to Hawaii. Okay.
No, everywhere. Like a corn is pollinated by wind.
Oh, corn. Yeah.
Corn.
Corn. Oh,
Corn,
yeah.
yeah.
Grasses in general.
Grasses
right?
in general.
Yeah,
Yeah.
pollinated
yeah,
by
yeah.
winds,
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Yeah. No, that's fair enough. And like I said, I have like a whole list of questions here that I don't even know how to ask properly
No,
without sounding silly, man.
it's no, there is no question is silly. That's how I say. Right?
Oh, no, for sure.
Yeah,
Oh,
and especially
man.
with the computer background, when we talk about computers, we sound like
It
silly.
sounds
right?
silly, man. Like, because some of these, man.
No,
Yeah.
What else you got?
see
You got
that's
some-
really
man.
important. That's so, right? One
So-
person may not know everything.
Right, for sure. Well, one thing I do know about is LD50.
There you
Right?
go.
Those 50, right?
Yeah,
Okay,
that's
so
it.
for people that don't understand, I guess I can describe it, but it might be better for you. That's the lethal dose at which whatever chemical that you ingest in a human body, where you have the chance of living 50-50 chance of living or dying, right? Is that fair enough to say?
Right. I mean, we use it in the insect world too,
Sure.
right?
Oh,
That's-
yeah, for sure.
So that is a concentration where the 50% of insects get affected.
Okay.
Uh,
Oh, that's
that's
interesting. You
particular.
use it for insects and bugs and stuff like
Right.
that. Okay.
So in general, those safety studies are like
Right.
when we are looking at the efficacy, that's how they study.
Oh, that's very interesting.
Yeah, just to clarify, the LD50, I don't think it applies to human. It's used as a guide, right? But we're not testing the chemicals on humans to see how,
Sure.
if half of them
Right.
dies, right? So
For sure. And
it's-
those are just toxicity. It's a guideline for toxicity levels.
Yep, and it's not a Monsanto thing. It's
No,
it's
Scientific thing.
Right.
It's a
Yeah.
regulatory bodies. They said, I mean, even regulatory bodies like that's how the scientific guidelines,
Yeah.
scientific guardrails are set.
So that's kind of stuff makes sense to me. LD fit, right? Because there's a calculation there. I can automatically apply it. Whatever milligram it is times your body weight. You can, in kilograms, you can calculate that, and it makes sense to me. That makes sense to me. That question right there makes sense to me. But
Yeah, but I think it's also can be used unfairly, right? Again, kind of going back to what I just mentioned, right? Where, it's whatever the test subject is, the LD50, right? I think the common, for you it was insects. I think a common animal that's used is mice. Correct me if I'm wrong, right? But a lot of people take the data, and it's a very good indicator of its acute toxicity or such. But it's not necessarily, you can't just apply it to humans, right? But you still use it as a guide, right? So if the LD50 is dangerous to mice, then it's a fair assumption it'd be dangerous to humans, right? So make sure people don't think that this is the studies are being conducted on humans and such,
Yeah.
Right.
It's a wide scientific guideline that's used in many different areas. And it's not Monsanto specific.
That's right. So again, I don't know much about all those safety studies, right? But all those safety studies are set by regulatory authorities.
Yeah.
But I could say, like, in my grad school, I used to do some of these studies.
Yeah.
So I used to take a bacteria which was toxic to mosquito, right? And take the bacterial protein which was toxic to mosquito and apply it to different concentration and see which is really the one which can work, right? So if you go to Lowe's or any of these stores where you buy the small pellets, right? You throw into the water ponds.
Yeah.
So they have a certain number of bacteria which can affect a certain mosquito population. That's how they make.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's funny you mentioned that.
That's
There's actually a GMO mosquito that there was this big controversy in
That's
Florida.
what I read.
Yeah, and this is completely random because I didn't really study it, but I guess the GMO mosquito ultimately prevents the reproduction or something like that. Or it's like a sterile mosquito, is that right?
Sterile male mosquito. Like a lot of people have incomplete information on the in general mosquito. People think that both mosquito will bite us, like both males and female mosquito.
Yeah, it's only the females, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
Only female mosquito will come and bite you, right? And I was reading, like, as an entomologist, it really excited me, the technology. What they've done is, it's very interesting. So they've introduced some lethal gene into the male mosquito.
Yeah.
When it goes and mates the female, it cannot produce a viable progeny. Like they cannot make a viable eggs or mosquitoes. So it will prevent.
Which would basically reduce or eliminate the population, right?
Correct. So I have a different views on it, right? So as of now, they're targeting on a Aedes mosquito, right? So if it definitely helps eliminate, that is one of the major vectors of several disease-causing pathogens like Zika, dengue, yellow fever, which will prevent that mosquito population.
Right.
There is a chance other mosquitoes will come and occupy its space.
Now, you guys do, obviously, crops, right? But do you guys actually do, like you were talking about GMO mosquito, do you guys actually, like, help other countries with those kind of problems as well? Are you guys in a bug industry as well?
My understanding is in terms of biotech, we are focused on crops, on bugs.
Sure.
We have a certain products targeted against bugs in corn, soybean, cotton. So these are all targeted against the bugs.
Yeah.
Right. So that's some of the new cool technology which we are in the pipeline, which we have taken a part of insect gene, we put it in the plant, and once the insect feeds on it, the insect will die on it.
What is that, like pheromones?
No, that's a RNAi technology. So
You want to expand on that a little bit more?
okay, so it's a RNA interference technology. It's a prior to the CRISPR or gene editing.
Oh yeah, CRISPR.
Right.
Yeah,
the
CRISPR.
RNA was the most talked technology, which people were talking to suppress gene expression or certain protein expression. And it's a very cool technology. We are using it in agriculture to control some of these nasty insect pests.
So what's the difference between that and the, I guess, I don't want to use the word conventional because we're going to get really confused, but the old style sort of agrobacterium method of creating or, making GMOs versus the newer technology? What's the difference?
The CRISPR versus the newer one. So again, I wish I've studied much more about the CRISPR. But what I read is right, it selectively edits and takes away certain, like for example, I was reading about a mushroom they've created with the CRISPR.
Yeah.
So the mushroom were turning brown, like in general when you keep it for a long time. The professor, I don't remember the university, it's a University of Pennsylvania or somewhere, what he did is a CRISPR. So he deleted the gene which was responsible for making the mushrooms into brown color.
All right.
Right. So it's not really introducing any genes externally. Use the same gene, just making a small slice out of it.
I heard something recently with the CRISPR. This is kind of going a little off topic, but they were able to target cancer cells.
It has a potential application in so many fields, right?
Yeah.
That's where now I look at in my scientific some of the databases as the most searched topic is CRISPR and gene editing.
Sure.
I think from healthcare to agriculture to every sector is looking at how we can use the technology. I think still a work in progress.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great, man. That's awesome. I love that.
What do you think? I don't know if this is within our bounds, so don't feel compelled to answer this. But what's the main form of technology that that Monsanto is using for, I guess, to make GMOs?
Well, we use all kinds of technology, right? But we traditionally, again, it's my understanding was we traditionally use agrobacterium. But if you look at a lot of the news recently, we are working with the different scientific groups on looking into some of the gene editing technology. And recently I read in the news recently we signed a collaboration with one of the company in St. Louis and one of the company at Harvard School. So there is a lot of different groups we are working with. I think we are openly looking into. But in terms of now existing products are all conventional. To get into the seed, we use this technology, right? Once after that, then we use a conventional breeding to get into your different corn lines, right? It's really the technology with the corn. If it's a soybean, to get into different soybean varieties or like different brands, we use conventional breeding, just cross different patterns.
Okay. Now, one thing, do you guys mind getting into some Roundup questions?
I'm happy to whatever I know, because that's one of the technology which I really love.
Yeah. Okay. So, I guess, kind of describe what glyphosate actually does, how it targets the roots of the plants, like the reason it was kind of created. And the person who created it, John Franz.
John Franz, well, I'm glad you know it.
Yeah.
So so he created. It's very old technology. It's been around for 40 years.
Yeah.
Right? And there is an enzyme in the plant,
Yeah.
which is not present in humans or animals, which is really important in certain making of proteins.
Sure.
So what the glyphosate does is it will inhibit that enzyme. It will prevent the plants making and that particular proteins. Right? It totally affects the plants.
Now, part of, I guess, that is when you guys, or not you guys in particular, I guess in particular, Monsanto, when you guys were using Roundup on your crops, obviously there was an issue with the Roundup killing the crops. So you guys had to prevent that. And how did you guys do that?
Well, we always look at the nature.
Yeah.
So that's like a clever scientist. I think several people looked at too. Like I was looking at even glyphosate. Somebody invented in 19 before Monsanto invented, but as a dye or as a chelator or something like that.
Yeah.
Right. So the certain scientists they've identified. Again, there is one of the agrobacterium which infects the plant, which had an enzyme which was breaking down this glyphosate. And they put that enzyme into these plants. When you apply Roundup, it will break down this glyphosate
Yeah.
to a non-toxic form, so the plants will not get affected.
Okay. So when you spray it on the crops, it actually kind of discharges the rest of the glyphosate, or or just brings it down to a non-toxic level.
No, it will break down into non-toxic form to the plant.
Interesting. And is there any effects on the soil?
Not really. So because again, the regulatory bodies have it's again I said like it's been around for 40 years, right?
Right.
People have used like there is I cannot even remember several hundreds of studies on glyphosate.
Yeah.
They've studied it, what's the impact on environment, soils, and non-targets, and everything, and found to be a safe, and it will break down to the safer level.
Yeah. Well, because I don't know if you guys are familiar with California. Recently, a couple years ago, they were able to put on their website and actually categorize glyphosate on their website. On the California EPA's website, they were able to categorize glyphosate as a carcinogen.
My understanding, I think that came from Iraq, one of the
Yeah,
right,
that's
the group,
Yep.
right? So
IRAC, so not the
IRAC.
country.
Yeah,
Well,
not Iraq. yeah.
Iraq,
Yeah.
but
That's the International Agency for Research on Cancer.
Correct,
yeah,
right.
Yeah.
But that was the review group, right? They didn't really do any study. They looked at some information, and it confused several people, several industry, right? After that incident, several regulatory authorities in U.S., Japan, Canada, Australia, New Zealand,
Yeah.
right? Like all these people, they came back and reaffirmed glyphosate is a safe chemical, right? It's not non-carcinogenic.
Yeah.
Right?
What are the? This is a tough
Thanks for
question.
answering that question, by the way. Yeah, I mean, I know it's tough to answer some of these questions, but I mean,
But again, I read all this information in the internet, right?
yeah.
Yeah, and I think the hardest part of some of this is just formulating the question, right? But, generally speaking, I mean, the IREC,
Yeah.
we can probably fairly characterize them as a fair organization for the most part, I guess. I mean, I'm not that familiar with them.
They're used in a lot of countries for
Right, so
setting the
I guess
standard for a lot of this.
I guess my question is, why is it political? Tough question to answer, because of everything nowadays is political, and why, you know what I mean?
Right. I mean, again, I speak as a regular, as a Hawaii resident, as a scientist, right?
Yeah.
Going back to your question, IRAC is an organization, is a credible? The organization are a credible organization, right? Sometimes people get into that committees and review committees, and if you look back, the members of the review committee, it was a little sketchy, right?
Really?
Right. As a scientist, if I look at those, I mean, they had a special interest in, right? And as you know, Nate, as we grow corn, glyphosate is not the one herbicide we use. We have several different herbicides. We, not only us, like growers around the world, they use, right? When they make it a political, or they make it a non-scientific, it becomes especially coming from a scientific background, difficult to answer some of those questions.
Yeah, no, I hear
Right.
that, but like you get companies or organizations like National Geographic, right? They've done articles on glyphosate, and they were talking about from 1987 to 2012, there was less than 11 million pounds of glyphosate being used on crops around the world. And then from 2013 to now, it's just around 300 million pounds of glyphosate being used by farmers. That's a huge jump within a couple of years of, I mean, I think it's, even as a healthy skeptic, you would have to look at those numbers and kind of be like, well, are we just increasing production and high yield, farms, or are we just inundating these crops and now everything's GMO? It's able to tolerate it,
Right.
You see where I'm coming from?
Right,
though?
right.
Yeah.
And again, I look at those numbers, right?
Yeah. And those numbers, by the way, were from National Geographic.
National Geographic
yeah.
Channel.
Elizabeth Grossman.
I've not read that information.
Sure,
but in
yeah.
generally, if I look at, right,
Yeah.
before we were using a glyphosate, we did not have a biotech crops which could tolerate the glyphosate.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, if you look at, we have a glyphosate tolerant corn, cotton, soybean, and is it alfalfa and canola too? I think
Alfalfa.
we have a big crops.
Yeah. So essentially, now what you can do is you can spray fields without worrying about the crops getting destroyed, and only the weeds and the targeted non-GMO, I guess, crops.
Like if I'm growing a corn,
Yeah.
and any other plant which grows in the corn field which
Yeah.
compete for food and resources for
Right.
and sunlight for corn is unwanted plant for a farmer.
Sure.
Right? He has to control those plants. Before, I can give my own example, right? I grew up in India. We didn't have that many of herbicides that time available. So now I was like my brother, he uses a different herbicides.
Right.
Right? So like he grows a lot of tomato. He doesn't have a glyphosate tolerant traits in the tomato,
Right.
but he uses a multiple herbicides on the field
Sure.
to control those weeds.
Yeah.
Right? To argue that question, glyphosate number might be higher,
Yeah.
but the grower, an example like my brother's case, right?
Yeah.
So all different herbicides he doesn't have to use. He can use one herbicide which works perfectly. Right?
Makes sense.
Right?
Okay.
So that's how I see it, right?
Yeah.
And even I hear from a lot of my colleagues who went to school to study about weed sciences,
Yeah.
the glyphosate and the glyphosate tolerant crops totally changed weed management program. And a lot of times they say took away some of their jobs because it works so precisely, so perfectly, the technology. Right.
So you, as I guess, as a family man as well, are comfortable with yourself in using Roundup in your own crops and eating the product. Like, do you have GMO products in your backyard, or is it just?
I don't have a glyphosate-based GMO products, right?
Okay,
I do have a
yeah.
papayas,
Yeah.
right?
Rainbow papaya.
Right.
Yeah.
But other products, yes, right?
Yeah.
For me, like any other crop, I just wash and just cook and eat,
Yeah.
right? That's how I see. Like that's interesting thing you brought up. When we go to grocery store,
Yeah.
as a Monsanto employee, we don't have a separate section.
Right. Right. Yeah.
We are regular type people, and I'm
Yeah.
extremely happy to go with I have a 4-year-old daughter,
Yeah.
and to go take the food and whatever we could afford,
Yeah.
and bring back and wash and cook and eat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. I just wanted to get that out there.
Yeah, no, that's some great points, and kind of going back to the Roundup, it's just one piece, and Roundup is a great product, but we still have to manage the crops very closely and carefully
Yeah.
because there are lots of other factors or reasons why weeds could get out of control.
Yeah.
And there's different strategies and methods we can implement to get the weeds under control, and they all sort of have their own personalities, if you want to call it that, which is why we use a range of products.
Yeah. Now, when we had talked earlier about pesticide use, right? Do you guys? I assume that you guys actually control the runoff from rain that goes into other. Like, that's one of the common concerns is, okay, well, they use pesticides. We don't know what they are. They're coming onto our crops, or they go somewhere else. How do you guys deal with that?
Right? Like that's why, like I was in the beginning, I was saying at Monsanto Hawaii, I'm again, overseeing the agronomic process, I'm extremely proud of what we do.
Yep.
The conservation methods we have, like if you visit our Kunia farm,
Yeah.
we have a berms, right? Not just pesticide, right? For
Yeah.
us, the topsoil is really important for
Right.
growing our crops, right? So we really put a lot of efforts in preventing the runoff of the topsoil, because for us it's a rich in organic matter,
Yeah.
rich in microbiomes, like microbes which really help our plants. So we have a robust conservation practices on every farm.
Sure.
That's one thing. And second thing, Nate pointed out cover crops, right? Which brings in so many benefits, not only prevent the runoff, erosion, and different adds back the nutrients, biomass to the soil.
Sure.
Also, it scavenges out whatever the nutrients which in the soil.
Yeah.
That's one thing. And other thing I want to point it out, right? Some of the, like all these herbicides we apply on the plants,
Yeah.
which takes up this herbicide and processes, right? It detoxifies, makes into non-toxic farm.
Yeah.
And when the weeds die, right, the plants are already metabolized
Yeah.
into a different way, right? So it's not really you apply
yeah.
pesticide and it's washing and coming up outside of the soil, right?
Yeah.
We are applying on a plant which has to take up and process it in order to be effective.
Now, okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I just kind of want to clarify that because you're absolutely correct, right? But when you say we apply it on a plant, we're applying it on weeds, right? Herbicides, as Roundup in particular, it does get on the crop, but you formulated a question earlier, and it could have been confused as we apply Roundup on our crop. Sort of, and you didn't insinuate this, but this could be the confusion, is that we apply Roundup as a standard part of the growing process, and that's not true. We actually don't apply Roundup on our within every field, right? So,
Yeah, I was talking more about a personal level for him at his house, in his crops in his backyard, if he felt comfortable using Roundup on those crops.
I use, right?
Yeah, okay, so
because,
that's
no, I use a
the
Roundup because some places lawn,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like and the place where I park car, like I take out the weeds, it's keep coming up, right? If I use a Roundup, it's very systemic. It takes out nicely, right?
Yeah.
Right. And again, I go to a temple.
Yeah.
I see some of my friends.
Mm-hmm.
They brought up a Roundup, and I was surprised.
Yeah.
So they were using to take care. That goes back to like Roundup is not only used by growers. A lot of the parks maintenance, the roadside to manage the weeds. Otherwise, they will go out of control. And some of the recreational areas where they arbor the mosquitoes and all these bad bugs really helps to maintain this one, right? Otherwise, traditionally, you want to go back and cut. It's not sustainable.
Sure. Right. I guess that would lead into another question is that you kind of brought up. Well, do you guys actually use Roundup in normal farming, big ag processes around your guys' farm? Do you guys actually use it there?
oh yeah, absolutely, we use it. Again, it's one of the methods, one of the tools in the toolbox that we have to manage weeds in our crop, right? So.
No, you guys just came out with a new Roundup too, right? A couple of years ago, a few years ago.
I would say like WeatherMax or like we have a different Roundup products.
Yeah.
Which will incorporate in different technology to minimize it impact on other the crops, or it has a different benefits.
Okay.
But in terms of Roundup itself, the active ingredients is the same.
Still the same.
Same,
But
same,
is
right.
it targeting different GMO products or newer or?
Not really the new, so we look at constantly, right? Okay, can it help sticking to the plant better, right?
Sure.
Can it prevent the drifting? Can it help flowing more easily? Like we look into more surfactants, we call it as, right?
Yeah.
So we use a different technology. So that's how the it might have a new version, but I exactly don't know what product you're specifically talking about.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, in typical, I guess, pesticides, there is health concerns in general, right?
Yeah.
Okay. for how am I'm not too sure how to phrase this question either, but when you guys lay down your pesticides, how safe from the time that you lay down that pesticide till you can walk on that farm? Because I know there's a lot of farms that used to have to wait sometimes hours, days before you can even touch it, right?
So I'm glad you mentioned that, right? When you say pesticide,
Yeah.
they're meant to farm for a different purposes, right? Okay. So we have an insecticide, which are targeted on a certain insects. When you apply it a certain concentration, they're toxic to insects, right? And the same way, like we have herbicides, we have fungicides, we have a different category, right? So, and all these products, right, before it comes to market, it goes to a different regulatory bodies like EPA for thorough the inspection on all aspects of agriculture, from a people standpoint to from a non-targets, like different aspects, right? They go through, and they write a called a label, right? Every product comes with a label. The label is the law. Like we look at, so they have it's called a REI. It's called restricted entry interval, and we have called a PHI, pre-harvest interval, right? So we use all that information. It really tells us what is the safe time to enter into the field, and there is another information which will tell us what is the safe time we can harvest that product, right? So all that information is in the label, right? We strictly, and I am certified from the Department of Agriculture, and Nate is certified, like us. All the people who handle the pesticide are certified by the Department of Agriculture, Hawaii Department of Agriculture, right? So going specifically to your question, when we apply, we dilute with water, right? When we take a small quantity of the pesticide and we dilute with the water when we apply. When we apply, as I was explaining, plant also living, they will process, right? On a diluted farm, it will get exposed to sunlight, air, all weather conditions, right? So we have to wait for so many hours until it becomes safer to enter into the field.
Sure. Now,
it's a long answer, but
no, that's good. Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, because I think that's important too, to gauge kind of how the process is and when you do that. Now, from 10, 20 years ago, how much you say you dilute the pesticide in water, right? So I'm assuming that you had, over the years, that level has changed, how much dilution you put in the water. Can you kind of talk about how much you guys sometimes use on the fields now as far as pesticides, like the pesticide to water ratio?
Right. Okay, so see, that's another good thing about is we disclose how much pesticide we use to the State Department of Agriculture, right?
Is that public?
Yeah, it's a public.
You can go on the...
Yeah, anybody can go and find out.
Okay.
In fact, I don't know how updated that information is. The last time when I was looking at that information, less than 1% of total pesticide used in Hawaii we were using on a only less than 1% of total restricted use pesticide
for
usage.
Monsanto.
For Monsanto.
As a whole, for everybody who is using pesticides in the Hawaiian chain.
Correct.
You were using less than 1%. That's an important figure.
Right.
That's a really important figure to get across.
Yeah, and there's other industries that I'm not going to call out, but
golf courses.
I didn't say it right, but they do use a lot of pesticides, and I wouldn't default to say that's a bad thing. It's just part of their business, and again, it's one of the tools in their toolbox. You can't always just get rid of it, but you can manage it much better.
Well, I mean, you can kind of compare. I think it's important to get these numbers out there because you can compare Monsanto with other companies that do the same thing, and you can kind of gauge and be like, well, why are we putting all the blame on Monsanto when this company uses, X amount more than we do?
Right. I think that's a fair question, right? But again, as what Nate was saying, like pesticides are used by so many different people, right?
Yeah.
Even like, and in my house I have several different pesticides, right? Like, so it's used by homeowners, like agriculture, recreational, and public health is another big one. right? Like there are different groups are using, but when it comes to agriculture,
Yeah.
and again, I work with a lot of small growers on a volunteer basis. Sometimes I interact with them, and I work with other seed industries. But in general, I'm extremely proud how much the interactions within the ag community they have. How can we have like more oralistic, comprehensive toolboxes in
Yeah.
managing some of these challenges and using best practices to manage this pests, right?
That's awesome.
Right. But unfortunately, ag sector is the one which is highly focused for some of these criticisms.
Sure. Yeah. Exactly.
Right.
Yeah, and I think an interesting note is that a lot of the products, the consumer products you'd see in, you know, the, I don't want to mention any, the big chains or whatever, you know, your home stores that you buy whatever products, but
Yep.
those products you see in there are the same products we use. So we don't use these extraordinary, you know, special types of products. There may be a few. I think one of the differences is that some of the products we handle are considered restricted use, which sounds bad, but that's a really good thing, right? Because we're required to follow regulations and rules and laws, right, when we use these. And the big difference, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, is that the concentrations are different. A lot of the consumer products are already diluted to a certain extent,
Sure.
right? So guys like myself and Krishna, we're actually trained and certified by the state to, or not trained by the state, but certified. We're trained in other ways to actually manage these pesticides, these products, you know. And I think the important note is that we take it upon ourselves at Monsanto, at our site specifically, to minimize the use of the restricted use products and pesticides in general, right?
Sure.
And we can't really eliminate them from our toolbox, right?
Yeah.
But it goes back to the whole program, IPM, Integrated Pest Management, which I would really like to get into here in a little bit. But there's lots of things that go into it. These other factors are what allows us to much better manage the amount of pesticides we use.
Yeah.
So one more thing I want to make a note of what you mentioned before, like on the safety of the pesticide, right? As I mentioned in Hawaii, 1904, how people were making the pesticide in the home and the using on the crops. Some of those not really the safe chemicals, right?
Yeah.
And now with so much of guidelines, so much of safety awareness, it's like we came long way.
Night and day, right?
But at Monsanto, we go beyond EPA for the trainings and some of the safety awareness, some of the safety practices which input. If everybody does the way we do, I will be happiest person, right? Right? As an entomologist, right? Like I've had a lot of different pesticide, even just growing up in agriculture family, right? Even now, the way we spray back in India and how we do it's totally different.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and it does involve a lot of work. So sometimes, you know, it could be frustrating in one sense where, because it kind of adds a lot of different layers to your daily job, right? But you got to keep it in perspective that these extra additional layers are a really good thing,
Yeah.
right? And, you know, not speaking to us, you know, but there's practices by you know, a lot of farmers out there where it's not really this integrated approach where it's like, oh, pesticide, let me grab it, and not really reading the labels and such, you know. And I don't want to paint a broad brush. There's a lot of people that's responsible with their use, but you know, I think the efforts that we've made at Monsanto, especially with Krishna coming in, I mean, we really have a strong focus on making sure we're following the labels on these products, because the label is like, it's like the Bible.
Yeah.
You know.
For sure.
And we're actually kind of we have a yearly or so, sometimes more periodic than that, but talk about the labels and the products and stuff like that to make sure we're updated on all the nuances of these products.
And I guess it really does come down, I mean, you guys, when you guys plant crops, right, those crops aren't even ending up on people's dinner plates, right?
In Hawaii, that's right.
Yeah, okay. So it's up to the farmer to use their pesticides, whatever they want to do, and grow the crops. you guys are just investigating and kind of putting a bunch of you're just getting a bunch of data really on how.
Right. That's a good point you made. So we don't investigate anything here. Right?
Yeah.
We are just growers.
Yeah.
So we get some seeds from a breeder from a different parts of the world within Monsanto.
Yeah.
So we make them one seed they give us.
Yeah.
We make them one bag of seeds.
Sure.
And give it to them because of, as I said, advantages with the Monsanto, in Hawaii weather and climate and the workforce, skilled workforce we get.
Sure.
And all those, the testing and other things, which will be done on hybrids, which we do not grow anything here.
Yeah.
Right. All those hybrids which are suitable, like if you want to test something, which is in the Midwest. Doesn't make sense to test in Hawaii, right? We don't have the same conditions, right?
Right.
And the farmers or growers they're using, those are hybrid seeds.
Yeah.
We don't grow any hybrid seeds here,
Yeah.
right? So that's going back to the data.
Yeah.
The data we generate is really for our operational purposes.
Right.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's important to get across too. Is why. Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah, if you guys don't mind, maybe we kind of go back to the IPM side of things, right? We talked
Sure.
about pesticides, and again, that's one part of this big pie, right?
Yep.
Several slices to the pie. Krishna, what are some of the other pieces to that pie of integrated pest management?
So we talked about, I think we touched about in several conversation, right? So I said like we always starts with a healthy soil and a clean soil too. Once we plant, right? So for example, if you're going with soybeans which are affected from a birds in the beginning, we put a bird nets on every field we grow soybean, right? On a corn, of course, we grow it in a bigger area. We go with a bird cannons, and sometimes people walking to manage these birds. And once the plants come up, then we focus on giving them optimum nutrition, optimum fertigation, right? So, and all these fields are surrounded with cover crops, which non-growing area, right? The cover crops bring whole different perspective to IPM. So they serve as a crop rotation. What that means is we are growing corn and soybean. The pests like insects, disease, and all those things are specialized to come on these crops. Will not get the food when we rotate it to some other crop, non-corn, non-soybean. So we grow a mix of different cover crops surrounding our field, and after we harvest these plants, so we constantly have a mix of different crops surrounded by our corn and soybean. That brings, we call it as a biodiversity, which brings a lot of good bugs and bad bugs which eats on those crops. As long as they don't feed on corn, they help in competing for the resources, space for the bad bugs.
Right.
Once our crop becoming established, we go visit every day those fields, and we look at similar visiting a doctor, right? Like we see those plants. Does those plants need a nutrition, or is it a more weeds which are competing for these crops, or is it something disease which is coming on the crops, or is it a bad insect, right? Really depending on those. If it's a low scale, low level, like which will be taken care by the robust plant health, we don't really interfere them, right?
Sure.
When it goes to certain level, which really plants cannot handle that pressure, then we make a decision on what is it. For example, on soybean, when we have a mites and whiteflies, we just go and spray water to knock them down.
So that's one of your tools that you can use. That's
right.
interesting. Yeah, that's awesome.
Then if it's a really as a herbicide or as an insecticide or fungicide, what really we have that challenge in the field, we need to address it, right? So based on that we go, and we always collect all this information right, from IT tools, right? Every person who goes into the field, so we have iPads, right? iPads, which georeferenced any information we collect in the field, and once they submit that, anybody who has access to those information can see, oh, what is the field, what challenges we have in that field, right? So then we combine all this information, right? So to make sure the plants are growing well, the way we expect them to grow, right? Once it reaches to certain stage, and then we go and look at how the corn ear is developing,
Yeah.
right? What are the challenges and when to harvest it, okay? So once we harvest, again we'll go back and put the cover crops and repeat the same process, right? And again, it's a lengthy explanation,
No, that's awesome, man. Dude,
it's
I'm
like
locked in
whole
right
whole
now.
farm approach we use, right? It's
Yeah.
not one thing we use, right? And that's why I always say there is no one silver bullet,
Sure.
right? And,
Yeah. And it's a very targeted approach, as you said that in a number of words, right? So every single field that we have on any farm, we're monitoring it, and we give it its own regiment more or less. And some of those fields are similar in ways, right? So
Sure.
we can kind of plan with that, and that helps out a little bit. But
Right.
again, it can get with all the looking at the fields that we do, it can get really complicated, and I kind of struggle with it sometimes, right? Which is why Christians there is a great resource,
Yeah.
and but it's a great thing, right? Because again, it's you putting all these pieces of the puzzle together,
Sure.
and it's all about ultimately the yield, and even bigger than that, it's about how are we taking care of the land. It's one of those pieces that we don't talk about every day,
Right.
but because we're doing all of these things, that's exactly what we're doing, especially with the cover crop. I'm so impressed with the cover crop.
right, I mean, the cover crops, and not only that, like so for irrigation management, I was
Yeah.
mentioning, right? We use a lot of those IT tools. Like we have a pressure valves,
Yeah.
right? And we look at the pressures as well as how much water we are giving. Then the other cool thing is like we take there is a satellites comes in, like they take a remote sensing like
Sure.
images,
Yeah.
and it connects with the weather stations, and it calculates, okay, how much evaporation is going on, how much
Yeah.
water we are giving, how much plants are taking up, right?
Right.
It really tells us that, okay, how much really the plant needs water, right? The same with the nutrients, as Nate was talking about, right? Nitrogen, one piece, right? But really we're looking at the soils, okay? How much we are contributing from the cover crops, how
pH
much we have in the
levels.
soil, pH, right?
Yeah.
How much fertilizer we need to add. It really helps not only us growers to make the better decisions on
Right.
how we can sustainably grow some of these crops.
That's awesome.
Yep, and this is a lot of talk, but these are things that we're actually doing. So speaking of the soil and tissue samples, we literally just pulled some soil samples,
Yeah.
had them evaluated, which is really fast. We got those results back.
Mm-hmm.
We already had some data from a lot of the areas, but we just dropped in some supplemental nutrients. For the tissue sampling, we're starting to kind of prepare for that already. Getting supplies and all that kind of stuff. So we look forward to all of this, and it's really exciting in an agricultural kind of way when all of this comes together.
Yeah.
I love looking at that data, right? It's like the leaf tissue sampling when it comes in, because you can look at one field here and one field there, and visually, you don't really know what's going on,
Yeah.
but you look at that profile, and they could be completely different in the nutrients that they're requiring.
Yeah.
And now we can say, oh man, this field over here needs this, and we can again targeted approach.
Yeah, you can troubleshoot to see if it's like the soil that's causing a problem, or a certain bug, or water, whatever it is. You can actually look at the data and compare and say, oh, this one's dying over here, but this one's growing really good. Well, what's the difference? And you can look at the data.
I mean, it's not much different. Like we go
Yeah.
annual do like the blood screening and look
Right.
for different things, right?
Yeah.
So it's like in healthcare, it's much more advanced.
Sure. Yeah.
Yep. One piece of the integrated pest management, really everything we do kind of ties back into the integrated pest management. We plant seeds. We evaluate the different products that we have, and we determine, not us, but generally speaking, we determine what population we need to plant it at, right? And
Yep.
there's a lot of factors that go into that. Something I'm interested in learning more about is the tillage side of things, and that's part of integrated pest management. And
What is that side?
I'll let Krishna take that
tillage,
over.
like to plant seed, we have we have to
Okay,
till
oh,
it,
okay.
right?
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So going back to that, thank you for bringing up this one. The glyphosate also plays a key role in sustainable or conservation tillage, because we don't have to disturb every piece of soil, right? Because as Nate was saying, population, we put a seed at a certain distance,
Sure.
right? That's how each plant will have their own space
Yeah.
and using the resources, right? So when we are using this, there is so much of soil which we don't have to disturb.
Sure.
To disturb the soil, we need lot of fuel, lot of resources.
Yeah.
It's not good for environment. It's expensive, right? So that's why, I mean, it's very well adapted technologies in the Midwest, where we have a no-till. They directly drill the seed into the soil, and in certain extent we have called a conservation tillage. Only the part of the zone where we plant seed, we till and we plant seeds, and then of course conventional tillage where we disturb all the soil.
You're right.
So I'm extremely proud on like Monsanto Hawaii farms. So we have and some farms 90 to 95% of the land is under conservation tillage, and the rest of the farms we have a 30 to 40% of our soils, or we are moving, we are using already conservation tillage. What that means is only part of the land is tilled or disturbed to plant the seed, which really helps and also meets another thing we didn't talk about, carbon neutral. So
Yeah.
Monsanto, as a company, committed to making a carbon neutral on our operations wherever we grow our
Right.
seeds. There is no carbon is coming out. Right?
That's awesome.
Yeah. So we have a goal of I think by 2021 we want to become a carbon neutral. But the way we are moving, I'm extremely confident we are already maybe ahead of our goals.
Yeah, well, because there's a lot of carbon that would come up in like typical manure, even, and that's a lot of farming uses that too. But if you guys are carbon neutral, what exactly does carbon neutral mean? Does that mean like eliminate all carbon?
No, so whatever the carbon we are producing,
Oh, okay. Right.
taken up by on the farm itself.
Right.
That's why first of all minimizing the carbon, right, by conservation tillage,
Yeah,
where
yeah.
we don't have to go equipments too many times. Then the plants also take up a lot of this carbon,
Sure.
right? So making zero carbon coming out of the field,
Gotcha. Okay.
right? So whatever the
At that
carbon we are
point, yep.
generating and taken up by the carbon neutral.
Oh, that's awesome. So like whatever you put in, you take right back out.
That's it.
Nothing. So it just evens out essentially.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, that's cool.
Right. And how do we do that? So
Yeah, that's
so basically we have several different land preparation implements, we call them. And an implement is basically a trailer that a tractor pulls to kind of work up the land. It's like a plow, right, from back in the day.
okay.
And we have tools that's very similar to that, right? But in previous practices in the industry in general, it's certain steps you have to take to work up the land to get it ready for planting, right?
Sure.
And so the no-till eliminates a lot of that, right? Which means that whereas before this big huge tractor would have had to work up every square inch of land, well, now this same tractor can do it in 1 or 2 passes versus 4 or 5, more or less, right?
That's
so
awesome.
that's one way that you reduce the total amount of carbon.
Carbon out there,
Yeah.
yeah. So your carbon footprint is essentially it's being reduced quite a bit over.
Yep.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, right.
Yep, really cool. Well, what do you say, man? I can keep going on here, but
There was one thing I did want to ask about. So you said there's only a certain number of crops that are GMO, right? Across the spectrum.
The globe, yeah.
But what about? Because it just popped into my mind. There was a lot of the fruits that we buy at the store now has no seeds or very little seeds. That wouldn't you categorize that as a GMO crop?
That's conventionally bred corn selected for that trait.
Right,
Yeah.
but that's a GMO crop.
No, it's not.
It's not.
It's not.
What is it called?
It's a conventional breeding.
Conventional breeding.
Conventional breeding, yeah.
How how would they remove the seed from that? In theory,
Right,
Sorry.
it's similar. Okay. So, like it's a similar, like just compared to humans, right?
Mhm.
So we have so many variations, right? It's the same way when a grower or a breeder grows a crops, you see several few plants are different. They have
Yeah.
less seeds, or there are certain genes they're less, and they select those characters and they selectively breed and they make it more population.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So you can just reduce that just by breeding.
Right, it takes multiple years, right? It takes a long time.
That's interesting.
Yeah,
So those would not be categorized as GMO.
correct. Right,
They don't need GMO processes to actually get those seeds out. They're just conventional.
correct. Yep.
That's interesting. Well, I appreciate that.
Yeah, breeding is that's probably the biggest piece, right? So
Yeah.
we talk about GMOs,
It-
and it's really ultimately breeding technology.
Yeah.
You know, well, you call it breeding technology, but it's just basic, basic nature. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
so it's really interesting stuff.
Well, I hope this is like the one of many conversations that we have. Obviously, I mean, I have more work to do on understanding a lot of this, but you've filled a lot of the gaps. So, dude, I appreciate you coming in. I really do appreciate everything.
Again, thanks for having and
Yeah.
and again, so we have a lot of experts on our company. If
Yeah.
people want to know about our company, and Monsanto Hawaii is like the website
Mm-hmm.
is a great resources too.
Sure.
We post a lot of information on what we do there.
Well, thank you guys
Yeah,
so much
and
for coming in.
I got just a
man.
quick couple things.
Yeah,
So
go.
there's a lot of experts in the company, right? But
Yeah.
all these experts, I know you in particular, you actually work with a lot of our competitors and a lot of groups, sort of agricultural groups, right? Everybody kind of helps each other out with the various pests or problems that we need to face, right? So it's it's a community,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's really fascinating when you sit down and take a look at it, you know. So kudos to that. And then one last thing, I gotta apologize to Monica because I could not get her title correct for nothing, but she is the corporate engagement lead,
Yep.
right? So I apologize if you're watching for that. I'll get it right the next time I see you.
And Monica, thank you so much, really, for letting this happen. I mean, you approved this, and I think this is a step in the right direction. So thank you for everybody who's.
Well, like yeah, so it's like that's the one thing I feel proud of, right? So really, it's us. We are proud to share what we do, right? And I'm extremely happy our company supports to share what
Yeah,
we do.
because this is a cool platform, and it was just strange too. I got the picture right of the farm that you guys work on. I didn't even know that was a Monsanto farm, honestly. this was like years ago. I was just like, oh man, because I work in the area, and I just saw the clouds coming in, the fog rolling in. There was rain on the mountain, and it was like God rays coming right through the clouds, and it was just a perfect scene. So I was like, oh, let me get in there. So I drove my car in. I was on the farm. Happens to be the Monsanto farm. There's no signs. There's no big walls and gates that keep people out. No, I just drove up. I took the picture. And I left. Years later, I'm doing a Monsanto interview with you guys, and it just so happens that was the Monsanto farm. And I was like, that was easy to get on there. Like, I'm not promoting anybody trespassing, but I'm just saying, like, you guys.
Yeah,
Nobody stopped me. I was like,
there's a small sign now at one of our sites. I mean,
yeah.
we have two different sites, right? But one of them is sort of the main big, huge site, and the one I work at is a lot more. It's remote, right? And it's much less. You would never suspect it's a Monsanto farm, right? And there's no big walls
Right,
keeping people out, you know.
But all these sites,
Lasers.
all these sites are open for public visit. Like
Yeah.
they can go and request tours, and
And you guys are very open about that.
they're,
Yeah,
they're
that's
very open.
a
Yeah.
good point.
Yeah, there is a gate at the big site, but all you have to do is push the little button and
Yeah.
talk to security. Say, hi, I just want to come in to the main office, you know, apply or ask questions or whatever, right?
Yeah, they'll just let you in. That's awesome, man. And there's a lot of misconceptions going around, and I hope that, like I said, this is one of many. And
Sure.
We'll work on it.
I appreciate you guys so much. Thank you guys
No,
for
thanks
coming
having
in. I
us.
appreciate
Yeah,
it.
this was awesome.
Sorry.
Thanks,
Nope.
Nate. Thanks
Oh,
for
yeah.
helping set all this stuff up, man. This is great. All right, guys, like, subscribe. We have a really good couple podcasts coming up, so please just subscribe. All right.
Peace
Peace
out.
out. Done.
All right.
My wife is calling so many times.
Oh, man, sorry.
7 missed calls. is what I would say.
All right.